right, it looks like we're streaming live. So let's see here, we're getting a few more coming in. We are ready to begin whenever you are, Chair Rachel L. Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Riggs. Looking to see to make sure we have everybody. I think we do.
We are going to be missing Timothy Christopher this evening.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to look at all the boxes on the screen. There's a lot. All right, so we can get started. Today is May 6, 2021, and I am calling the Budget Committee meeting to order. Ms. Riggs, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
I guess I should be saying committee member, excuse me. Committee member Rocky Smith.
I'm here.
Committee member Mike Mitchell.
Here.
Committee member Kyle Arnhart.
Here.
Committee member Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Committee member Emma Lugo.
Present.
Committee member Adam Marl.
Here.
Committee member Casey Flesh.
Here.
And as I mentioned before, committee member Timothy Christopher is absent this evening, and then Chair Rachel L. Smith.
Here. All right, so I think first item is for Mr. Conkle. We're going to pick up where we left off, I presume.
Yes, thank you. I guess I'd just start off by thanks everybody. Glad everyone's here to make it again tonight. Before I jump back in, I was going to propose to start. We seem to kind of end on discussions about economic development. I was going to propose to pick up there unless somebody has somewhere else they'd like to start or any questions before I begin.
It's probably a good spot. It seemed to be an area that had the most questions on Monday.
So hopefully everyone, Mr. Zook sent out the additional details that I believe was what we're trying to respond to in response to Commissioner McGriff on Monday night for additional details for some of the funds. So that email, the detail in those emails are also going to be presented in these slides as we go through them. So you don't necessarily need to have that email in front of you. These slides will represent the same information that you received in that email. So I'd propose to start with ECDev. So that'll be on page 50 and 51 of your budget book. And so what we did here was there was on page 51, it talked about community programs and grants, and we broke down community grants for 400,000, tourism promotion for 650,000, business promotion for 635,000, community functions for 100,000 for a total of 1,785,000. So what you see here is breaking down those larger numbers into more specific detail. So we begin with, under materials and services, we have professional and technical services. That was on the budget line for 310,000 over the 2-year biennium. That is made up of 200,000 for the fiber optic broadband feasibility study and potential public-private partnership negotiation. That is tagged obviously here as ARPA money. We believe that would be eligible. What we are waiting for are the details of, can that be used for the planning work or negotiations or feasibility studies, or can it only be used on hard construction costs? Included in this are the Arts Commission, Arts Engagement, and then legal, broken out into that line item. The next column, community grants. So that's the Metro Enhancement Grant Program. That's typically what we see in terms of available funding from the tipping fees. from the transfer station, and that's allocated out to grant recipients by the Metro Enhancement Board. And then we break down the 650 in tourism promotion. Includes implementation of the tourism strategy at 605,000, and then a remainder of 45,000 that we've left as it's TRT money. It's tourism dollars, but we have not allocated that yet. And there's your 650. And then on the next slide, we'll break that number down further. Then we move into tourism implementation. So this is ARPA funded money. So essentially, we believe that through ARPA, whether it's revenue or tax revenue, which is where we need some guidance. So we've took a conservative approach that it's tax revenue. If you can show an underpayment, you can potentially use those funds to replenish that under collection of tax revenue because of COVID. So we believe we can demonstrate a $75,000 loss in revenue for COVID from that. And then we have the economic development strategy at 400,000, the ombudsman programs at 40,000, and then the Downtown Oregon City Association is slated at 120,000. So currently we're in a contract with DOCA, 2-year contract at $60,000 a year. So that money, we continued that funding. Now, whether the commission decides to enter an agreement or not, and at what funding level, that'll be determined when that time comes. And then we have for community functions, another commission goal of 100,000. So it's essentially, to support citywide events that could come forward, whether from nonprofits or, for example, we have the 100-year anniversary of the Oregon City West Lynn Bridge or similar type events. So I think it'll be a determination of how those funds are used, but we have allocated funds there as resources to have that flexibility. Next slide, please. Or I'm sorry, were there any questions before I jump? Okay.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't put my finger over there fast enough. Committee members Rocky Smith made mention of on the line item, let me see here. So where it said,
Do you need us to back up one? There we go.
so they're not line items. So in the line, so I'm looking, I have mine all on one sheet. So
Okay, why don't we go to the next slide real quick? Then we can probably line up your sheet with what we have.
no, I found it.
Okay.
It's the $45,000 that's unplanned for the TRT. And I wrote down in my notebook here that Commissioner Smith was interested in having further discussion, maybe not tonight, about the Oregon City Civic Improvement Trust.
Okay.
Which is where we usually use that money.
I'm not sure if is that a question to me?
I'm just saying we need to put it in the parking lot. Mr. Smith, did I characterize that correctly?
I guess I would say the 100,000 under community functions, I believe, is what we were thinking of. That could be similar to the Civic Engagement Trust, or if the commission wants to set up the criteria and staff runs it, or if we want to have the commission allocate the fund. I mean, I think there's flexibility on how that is. I think that's what the 100,000 was intended for. Not that you couldn't add to it or subtract to that.
Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, I wasn't really specifically talking about that necessarily, that 45,000 or the 100,000. I think we need to have a general conversation about whether or not we revisit the Oregon City Civic Improvement Trust or not, or how it works, and whether or not that's a vehicle for dealing with the community events through grants, or if there's some other way to do it. I think it needs to be a discussion. I don't necessarily have a specific idea yet of how to work it. And it occurred to me in the last 48 hours that almost no one knows what I'm talking about with Oregon City Civic Improvement Trust, because 3 commissioners don't have any clue of what that is, probably. even the city manager kind of questioned what I was talking about, because it's something we haven't actually done in a while, but it's a fund within the city that has been usually the pass-through for the tourism room tax, and basically being able to have a committee that basically allocated funds similar to Metro Enhancement for tourism projects. So, and we put it on hold mainly because we wanted to build up that money for implementing the tourism program, but we've never revisited whether or not we wanted to bring that back as a vehicle for programs and whatever. So I think we just need to have a conversation about the best way, and that's a whole separate, topic for another meeting.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and continue.
Do you have anything else, Commissioner Smith?
No, I can take my hand down now.
Okay.
So let's go to the next slide, Katie, please. Oh. Yep, thank you, this one. So here we've broken down in more specificity the programs that will be utilized or implemented and to meet the goals and the breakdown of the budget asks. On the left, we have the tourism strategy implementation at the 680,000. And then on the right, we have the economic development strategy at the 400,000. Are there any questions on this?
Smith, and can you speak up a little bit?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
A little bit low.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Smith.
Okay, can you put that slide back, or did I just lose? I lost it. There we go. So my question really, the breakdown, this details has helped a lot actually with most of my questions. I guess the only question that is left for me now is my only worry about implementing the tourism strategy is this. When we have the detail on the right that specifies the marketing strategy, really in terms of advertising, I want to make sure that we're tackling one of the crucial pieces, which I believe is probably addressed in some of these tourism program breakdowns, is how we make sure that one of the key components that we were concerned about in Oregon City was if we advertise people getting here, that the core structure of tourism in the city, meaning the museums and attractions, are somehow open and operating in a realistic way, so that once we advertise people to get here, there's something for them to do. Because if we aren't supporting those museums and attractions, or at least making sure that they're coordinated in some efficient way, that people aren't going to stay and spend the night, when people aren't going to necessarily spend lunch at a downtown restaurant unless there's things to do throughout the day. So a lot of people were talking about, when we use the elevator as kind of a hub to say, well, the Ermatinger House is open, the Interpretive Center is open. A lot of the questions in tourism has been, how do we make sure that those are coordinated hours on museums, that there might, is there some way of doing a joint ticket, some way to make sure that that general tourism infrastructure is operating efficiently, so once people get here. So I don't know if that's, some of that is addressed, I know, in some of these tourism projects, but I just, maybe James can connect the dots for me on that. But I think most of this breakdown has helped a lot in understanding the breakdown of where things are at.
Yes, I can. It is certainly on our minds, and it's certainly in our plans to work with all the museums so that we can coordinate work with them to coordinate their openings. And of course, every museum is different, as you know, because they have their own staff and they have their own situations. So one of the programs we have is the Concierge Institute, which is designed to help those nonprofits with operational plans, how to be even more professional, how to update their systems. And so all of that's all built in. But as you also know, it also rests with the staffs and the people and the level of comfort they may have in opening up their operations. So we have to work closely with them really on a one-on-one basis.
Okay, Committee Member Mitchell?
Yeah, I have a question, and this may be for Mr. Zook or Mr. Conkle, I'm not sure. But that goal 5 contingency of $80,000, I mean, we already have a massive contingency elsewhere in the budget. Is this a portion of that, or is this another $80,000 contingency? And if it is, I mean, couldn't, if we need additional funds in this area, don't we have the big bucket of contingency money already set aside? So I guess I'm wondering, when we're looking for money for, doing things like supporting some of the commission's goals, do we really need to have another $80,000 hung up here in contingency?
Sure. And so the left side under tourism, because that's TRT money, that's restricted to tourism money. So we left it in there. Once again, could we have, a COVID's over event, or, some type of a event once we're able to get back together? Could we do something for the bridge? Could somebody come in with a great idea? So we left it in there just so we have the flexibility should something occur that we can allocate those funds, because we couldn't go use it in parks, I guess, to answer your question directly.
Yeah, I forgot about the dedicated funds issue. I apologize.
The right side is general fund money. So that could be reallocated. The economic development strategy, that's all general fund money. The left side is TRT money. Are there any other questions before we move on?
I think it looks good, Mr. Conkle.
Okay. Katie, why don't you go ahead and click. So before we jump into general government, after economic development, your budget book was on page 52, 53 was information technology. We had spelled out earlier on an earlier slide, the major investments here were for disaster recovery and backup systems, as well as the addition of an information technology director in the second year, not the first year. So I guess, are there any questions? I guess I just want to hit those. We didn't make a specific slide for that because it's a lot of that money is into network security, ongoing licensing, that are costs for each desktop and whatnot in order to maintain our IT system internally.
Okay, Ms. Lugo?
Yes, I'm sorry. I still had a question back on economic development and tourism.
Okay.
So my question is, does Oregon City spend with the Blue Heron site being purchased recently by the Chinook
Grand
and
Ron. Mm-hmm.
yeah, Grand Ron. I'm sorry, I do that all the time. Please forgive me. Does Oregon City have any plans to have any kind of event in the next biennium that acknowledge and that kind of raise up the unique Native American cultural history of the region? I know that we have $150,000 allocated for a statue for the 5 that were murdered in Oregon City. But I'm wondering if we're doing anything else, like in conjunction with Grand Ronde, or if there's any discussion about that, because of the unique cultural history of the falls, and that could be a big area of draw for our community if we were to begin to explore how to raise up that part of our history. That's my question.
Yeah, thank you. And I am trying to find it. The commission, as one of their goals this year, was to determine and establish relationships with the tribes that have shared history with Oregon City. And so staff will work jointly with all 5 tribes identified in the Willamette Falls Legacy Project and make connection with other tribes that reach out. The process for establishing these relationships and partnerships building will include smaller introductory meetings with elected officials from both government agencies to form basis for formal government to government relationships, and then develop formal agreement with commitments such as continued communication, collaboration, and formal recognition. So they've identified that as one of the goals, is to really begin that process of formalizing that government to government relationship, since they're each sovereign nations in and of themselves. So we haven't specifically identified any funds for like a celebration or anything like that, other than the 150,000 for the Cayuse 5 memorial.
Thank you. I mean, I would encourage the commission to consider putting more on that, you know, maybe investing more into that, because I mean, we do a lot to celebrate the history of the people who came here that colonized this land. And I don't mean any disrespect to those people, but we do almost nothing to, you know, really raise up the history of the people who lived here for like, you know, 13,000 years before them. And that would be really a good way to move forward as a city commission, to invest a little bit more in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lugo. Commissioner Smith?
So just on that same topic really quick, the End of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center has redone a separate movie that will be telling some of that story. The End of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center has been working with the Grand Ronde Tribe quite a bit. And I know there's been talk of having several events at the End of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center to continue that relationship, but also to premiere this new movie. But part of that's all been on hold because of the COVID guidelines and everything. So I have a feeling towards the end of the summer or into the new year, those issues or those events and those conversations will continue. So I know there are things in the work outside of the realm of the city budget, but there are things happening there.
All right. Thank you for adding that. I was thinking about that video as well. I've seen the trailer for it, and it looks really good. I'm excited and waiting for it to be released publicly. Just checking, were there any questions about the IT budget or anything like that that Mr. Conkle had just talked about? Seeing none, then I think you can move on.
Okay, and then just before we get into general government, the last on page 54 is geographic information systems. So GIS works closely with public works, building, planning. It's really a citywide resource, both internally for as-built, construction plans, building permits, permitting process, as well as an interface with the public through our apps on our website for mapping and making those utilities, park amenities, art routes available. So any questions about the GIS budget? It's on page 54. Okay. So now we get into page 55, which is the general government. The general government expenditures is consistent with prior bienniums. They're budgeted at $4.7 million and include overall community enhancements, such as the Willamette Falls Legacy Project and street lighting on city roads and shared city services, such as maintenance and general liability insurance. The proposed biennium includes funding to meet Goal 7 with the installation of a memorial for the Cayuse 5 and Goal 2, a citywide facility master plan. Transfers out comprise the remaining expenditures with payments into equipment reserve funds for elevator operations and to support the library, planning and development, engineering service areas. So the highlights are on the screen.
Yeah, Mr. Conkle, if I may, to return to the conversation from Ms. Lugo, when we talked about that 150,000 for the memorial, I think we're hoping that it doesn't cost that much money. We just put that in as a placeholder. We are waiting on more information from the tribe on a design. And so it's really a little bit of throwing a dart at the wall. And we're hopeful that it doesn't cost $100,000 for a memorial, but we really don't have any idea. So that is a placeholder, that there is potential funds there that could support other tribal relationship building or any type of events related to that conversation that we were just talking about, that might be able to help if we got toward the end of maybe the second year in the biennium. I'm hoping we can move the memorial forward and know about the balance or how much that may cost. We're waiting on the tribe at this moment to respond to us, but with some design, with their design plans for that memorial. So anyway, just want to share a little bit more about that, the discussion that we had about that memorial and that $150,000. Mr. Mitchell?
Just curious about that 1.3 million reserve for future expenditures. What's the reasoning for that?
Yeah, those are actually dedicated towards the parks donations. Part of that is Metro Enhancement Grant reserve, and the third piece is unspent tourism dollars. So those are all restricted funds that we've accumulated that are not set for appropriation in this budget.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. The police department, with a total budget of 24.9 million, is the largest department in the general fund, representing 44% of the expenditures, and include both police operations and code enforcement. Personnel costs of 47 sworn officers and 12 non-sworn. Operating materials and services in the department increased overall due to operating a larger building on a much larger property. The 911 dispatch service provided by Clackamas County increased by $30,000 to $870,000 for the biennium. The proposed budget includes increased funding for the homelessness program, which helps to meet commission goal number 4.
Mr. Conkle, or maybe Chief Van, can you explain to me why the flower basket program is part of code enforcement and parking? Are we talking about the flower baskets that are hung downtown? It seems like an odd spot for that to be in the budget, but what am I missing? What connection am I missing?
3, it's been through that department since the city started the flower basket program.
My understanding is this started a long time ago when I believe there was some money that was going from the collection of parking fees that went toward it, and I think that was the origin. But yes, it's been there forever.
That is correct. That's my understanding as well, was that it was tied to the collection of parking fees downtown, went into beautification of downtown, and it has remained there.
May I add that, Rocky, you probably remember this, Peter Bush was kind of one of the people that was helping us with that particular flower basket program when he was with code enforcement.
It gives me memories of the trolley fund.
Well, I know they started it while I was still working for the city, and Peter Bush was involved in it heavily.
Yeah.
At least it's better than having to inspect the privies.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, Mr. Kunkel.
Right, thank you. Let's move on to Parks and Recreation, please. Parks and Recreation includes parks and cemetery maintenance, aquatics, the Pioneer Center, and recreation. Additionally, dedicated park donations are tracked separately to comply with donor restrictions. As we discussed during the retreat, park staffing is well below industry standards. Therefore, we have incorporated an administrative assistant into the budget from our existing resources. The department plans to address goal 2 by engaging a consultant to prepare a Parks and Recreation master plan. Increased funding for deferred capital maintenance includes funding to address needed deferred park improvements, such as $280,000 for a new cemetery roof, $75,000 for the Stafford Park Dog Park, and $50,000 for the cemetery master plan. Equipment and software needs total $70,000 for the biennium, which includes a new cemetery accounting and tracking software. Next slide, please. So consistent with, oh, I'm sorry, I went too fast.
Don't go yet.
So do you have more on this slide?
No, what's following is the individual breakdown by Parks and Cemetery, Recreation, Pioneer Center, consistent with the email that you received this morning. We put those details into a slide.
Okay, I haven't read the email, so I want to see the details. Mr. Flesh, you have a question?
Yeah, I couldn't get my hand up fast enough before we left the police. A quick question. Is there a reserve for overtime if there were a big event, search and rescue, fires, etc.? If there was a lot of overtime, where would that come from?
That reserve, it's a great question. That reserve, if we needed it, would come out of the general fund contingency if it exceeded the total police appropriation.
I think this gets back to at the beginning when we talked about 17% for 2 months operating plus the 10% emergency contingency in the general fund. So because this is fully generally, I mean, vast majority is general fund funded. If there was an emergency like that, that's where we tap back into that 10% contingency for emergency situations that we have.
Do you have any follow-up questions, Casey?
No, I'll put my hand down. I'm a little slow on the computer today.
That's all right. Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, I just wanted a correction. I'm assuming you mean the roof at the mausoleum, because you said the cemetery roof, and I don't think the cemetery is covered as this point.
Yes, ma'am. The mausoleum. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I thought you meant.
Commissioner Smith?
On page 69 of the Parks Department, there's a reference there to the special programs, and it mentions transient room tax. Is that where the money comes into the, why would that be in parks?
That is for the RV park.
Got it. Yep. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And then one other question is, I forgot about that, so thank you for that reminder. Irma Tinger House staffing is staying the same. Is it changing in this next biennium, or is it staying the same?
It is currently staying the same. We are looking to pursue options to increase the number of hours that we have the facility open, but as of right now, it is staying the same.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Mitchell?
Mr. Conkle, in your message the other night, you mentioned Wesley Lynn Park Phase 2, but I don't see that here on the capital outlay list.
That is SDC funded.
Okay, thank you.
So that one would be on a later slide when you're covering SDC, the SDC funds. Ms. Lugo?
Yes, when I think about areas of potential development in Oregon City that would increase the quality of life in our city as well as attract tourism, Newell Creek Canyon always comes up as an area that I think is an undeveloped area of potential. I'm wondering if this budget biennium includes any plans for improvement or for development of Newell Creek Canyon. It's one of those spaces that I think, like, when people think of places to go, like up in Portland, they'll think of parks like Forest Park, and we have this beautiful canyon that we have this incredible potential to develop. And I'm just wondering if we've, taken any funds to look into that in the next biennium.
So at the end of Warner Milne Extension, Metro has built a brand new trailhead. That portion where the parking and the trailhead, the restroom facilities are located are in the city. The vast majority of Newell Canyon, which has been acquired through Metro's property acquisition over the years from willing sellers, is actually owned by Metro and outside the city limits. But they did do a master plan for trail planning that included both bicycle and pedestrian hiking through the canyon. So COVID has slowed the opening down of that, but if you were to drive down Warner Milne Extension, you could see the improvements that they've made that they're just awaiting to open.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding it's going to open this fall. That's when they've slated for it to open. All right, Mr. Mitchell, do you still have your hand up? Is that a new hand? No, okay. Commissioner McGriff, I believe that you had a new hand up.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Kendall, I wanted to ask you about the goals and project list, just very briefly. Towards the bottom, you have constructed dog park at Stafford Park.
Yeah.
I am aware, and I'm going off memory here, so forgive me, that when Stafford Park was deeded to the city, there were some minor restrictions. And so I am assuming that you're talking about a very small portion of this being for dog park and not the entire park.
Right. And so Stafford Park was identified because of the location and the how it was designed. It would be easier to add fencing to a particular area in Stafford Park to incorporate a fenced dog park. And so that's why Stafford Park was identified as a possible location for a dog park.
Okay, thank you.
I actually had a question about that line item as well. Commissioner O'Donnell, if you don't mind me tagging onto that and asking my question. First of all, I've been drawing a total blank on where Stafford Park is at. So if you could remind me where Stafford Park is at, I have not been able to recall it at all.
Lane, next to the historic Stafford House on Holmes Lane. It's the Rose Farm is here. It's here.
Oh, okay.
Behind kind of behind Mountain View area.
I gotcha. Okay, that's why I was like, I could not come up with where it's at. So, okay, so that helps me mentally. My real question is I'm interested in the fact that that's listed as a deferred maintenance, and I don't feel like constructing a new dog park is a deferred maintenance item. To me, like, if you're talking about things that are in a deferred maintenance list, we've got a whole pile of things like asphalt that needs to be fixed and playground repair and all kinds of things. So I'm curious as to how that made it on the list of priorities for deferred maintenance, because we all know the deferred maintenance list is really long.
It was listed as a park improvement, not necessarily deferred maintenance. And so how Stafford Park and Wesley Lynn Phase 2 actually was listed, or how we came up with those particular locations, it was based off of the November 2019 survey that we did with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. And what we did is we looked at off-leash dog park options. And based on the information that we received, we looked at Park Place Park, Barclay Park, and the Wesley Lynn Phase 2 development and park as possible locations for adding some off-leash dog parks. And so based on the information that we received, Wesley Lynn Park rose to the occasion as one of the places that was the most used and most desired locations as a possible location for an off-leash dog park. And then also based off of the community survey that we did in 2020, that was the area where the community was the least satisfied with the Parks and Recreation Department. And so based on the comments from those two surveys and the work that we were doing with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee to fulfill those needs to the communities and those desires, we identified those two locations as possible locations for dog parks.
Okay.
Are you referring to the capital outlay description on page 69 or somewhere else?
Yes, and I
think-
believe it's
I
on,
think
I think it's on the slide as well.
I think it's a,
Yeah, I think honestly, that was a interchange. We used term interchange.
yeah,
It wasn't
I
really-
don't consider Stafford Dog Park.
Right.
I
right.
consider it a capital outlay. I think it's a sentence we could have written better.
Right.
Okay, yeah, I have a big question mark next to that paragraph of trying to put two and two.
'Cause I don't think a cemetery master plan's deferred maintenance either in that sentence. So I think we needed a period somewhere rather than commas.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was confused by that. All right, Commissioner O'Donnell.
So a project that I've lost track of, I don't know if it's been accomplished or if it's represented anywhere in this budget. But at some point, we had a lot of discussions about the poor condition of the bathrooms at the cemetery. Is that part of anywhere in this capital expenditure program, or is it dealt with elsewhere, or has it been accomplished?
The cemetery repairs to the bathroom hasn't been accomplished at this time. It is a priority for us to address. Obviously, with the cost associated with the roof for the mausoleum and some other exterior and repairs to the cemetery offices, we have some money available. We will look to address that as we continue to look at the master plan and figure out what we can do for long-term maintenance for that particular area. So it hasn't been addressed. It is a priority, but in this current budget, we don't have anything available for funding to address that at this time.
Well, I don't know how to react to that. I knew how high profile it was. We apparently have not even explored what the cost would be. And we're saying we don't have any monies to fix it if we did have a quote on it. So let me give that some thought. It was so high profile. It was one of the key things mentioned, and we're not looking at it. So I'll leave it at that and we'll move on.
Are the bathrooms functioning?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Maybe a tour is in order, Mayor.
Yeah, I missed that high profile article or wherever it became high profile. I'm not aware of that one, but anyway.
It was, yes.
Commissioner McGriff.
Yeah, I just had a couple more questions. So is there anywhere in the budget, we had talked some years ago, I'll say pre-Kendall, about uniform signage of the parks. And I know that there really isn't a great sign that identifies Stafford Park if you were driving down Holmes Lane at the speed limit rather than the way they drive right now, which is like 80 miles an hour. But I was thinking of, Singer Creek Park, which has kind of one of the old style. We've got some nicer signs in other areas, and whether we were going to do that. And then the other question I had goes back to my question about Stafford. Again, something in my brain is coming up regarding Stafford Park. And maybe, one of the parks people knows that, but I remember something vaguely about Barclay Park and Stafford Park, which were, in my opinion, are kind of like heritage parks, and the Stafford family gave it for a specific reason. So I guess my question is, were there any restrictions in the giving of those two parks that would allow other things other than, Stafford has never really been improved, and people do take their dogs there. Nothing against you people with dogs. I don't have a dog right now, but I know Barclay Park when it goes down into the canyon area is more of a natural area. It's the area up on top by the school that's, I'm assuming they're looking at. So I just want to make sure that we're not overstepping in any way. I know that that's something that people talked about. As a matter of fact, when I was in the Ladderbeck Park Planning Committee, they wanted us to make part of that a dog park, and that did not come up in the planning for the eventual plan that came forward. There's no dog park there.
Thank you, Commissioner Griff, for those comments. We'll make a note of that and make sure that we check the deed if there are any deed restrictions related to Stafford Park.
And just for a follow-up on the restroom question, we do have an idea of what the cost would be. It would be around $300,000 to redo the bathrooms there. So we would definitely need to make some adjustments to funding in order to kind of move forward on a project like that.
Mr. Reed or other staff, I thought at one time on Monday, you mentioned a possible set aside for parkland purchases. But is that in the SDC slide as well?
Are you referring to land acquisitions?
Yes.
That would be funded out of the SDCs. We haven't identified any properties at this time that we'd like to pursue. And that will be outlined with the update of the master plan, which will help us identify particular areas for land acquisition.
I have one that's in the queue that we talked about, but we haven't gotten back to.
Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, so if we have a known project and a known cost, the bathrooms at 300,000, why isn't that in here? Why aren't we doing it?
Well, funds are limited, so we have to identify what the priorities are. And so what we're trying to do is identify the immediate needs, and something that will come out of the deferred maintenance assessment that we're doing and completing in the next couple of months. We will have a list of what actually needs immediate repairs and what's a priority, and different things that we need to plan for over a 20-year span. We know that it's an issue. We know that it needs to be taken care of, but we try to identify the areas that really need immediate attention right away. And the cemetery roofs and the mausoleum need immediate attention, and we needed funding for those. So that's why the bathrooms at the cemetery didn't make the list at this time.
It seems like maybe we have a lot of money in the budget in other places. It just seems like maybe the committee would want to think about that.
Commissioner O'Donnell. Oh, you're muted.
Just to respond to that, I do intend to think about it. I do intend to go down to the cemetery. I want to see if there's any interim fix that can make it more tolerable. I mean, it was portrayed almost as an embarrassment to those who are in the process of burying their loved ones to have to use that. So I want to see for my own eyes how much it needs. If maybe there's some interim fix we can do. Thanks.
Commissioner Smith.
I think we may want to have a conversation about public restrooms, period. I know Public Works has, talked about public restrooms at the elevator that got all put on hold. Public restrooms in general throughout the city is an issue, and I think it's a topic for this meeting, but also future some other meeting too, to discuss it broader.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I re-raised my hand. I'm going to agree with Commissioner Smith. I mean, any destination that I've been to provides for public restrooms to allow the tourist trade to utilize them. And I think that's something that not tonight, but it needs to be a future discussion. I'm totally in agreement with that. Thanks.
right, any other questions about parks? And Tony, I don't know, did you include, does that include the pool and the other things related to parks?
No, we'll bring up the slide real quick. And so we can, if we're done with parks, this was the detail of the expenditures. Then we get into the recreation and aquatics detail. So this is obviously the pool. Pretty much a very status quo. You see some increases, as minimum wage continues to go up every year with the legislation that was passed here in Oregon. That's on page 70 and 71. Any questions about the pool? Next, then we'll go to the Pioneer Community Center. So the large capital outlay here is replacement of the HVAC units. Some additional interior and exterior secure key locks. Once again, a pretty standard stable budget on pages 72 and 73.
Commissioner Griff?
Yeah, it seems just it's a little bare bones to me. It seems like they're always kind of skimping, and they kind of get a little, I guess in a way, to me, they kind of get a little bit of short shrift. I mean, they're doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes with their senior outreach people, and particularly, the Meals on Wheels program is, I have a real soft spot in my heart for that, because I know how critically important it's been and how important it's been even now with COVID. So does it always run this lean?
Yes.
And then I'd add that the other dumb question I had about parks wasn't there a plan to replace the house that the office is in now at the cemetery with something that is more efficient and more modern? What happened to that? Did that go by the wayside when parks maintenance merged into the public works parks facility?
Correct.
So what's going to happen to that house?
It'll be addressed as part of the cemetery master plan, and we'll probably identify what that replacement cost is and when we can afford to do that.
Oh, okay. I kept remembering I thought, oh great, they're gonna get a much better facility. And
we started down that road, and then First Street became available, and then the opportunity to consolidate some of the maintenance operations.
Okay, well, maybe that's exactly where the cemetery bathroom went in terms of, because I think I remember that being as part of that overall facilities that we were looking at the cemetery. There was going to be a new bathroom, there's going to be maintenance stuff for the guys and the gals, and a new office. So was that all part of that as well, Tony?
Correct.
Okay.
Hey, Commissioner O'Donnell? You're muted.
I do. I am in agreement with Commissioner McGriff about funding. I think we need to keep an eye on funding for the community center. Quite honestly, they were essentially unavailable during COVID. They weren't even answering their phones, and I know that for a fact. And I think they're an integral part of the future. I think the offering of social services is going to go through there. So we need to keep an eye on their funding and be prepared to move something. And as far as the sizing of the park facility, the cemetery facility and the bathrooms, Mr. Conkle is exactly right. It comes down to right sizing that facility in view of the fact that we moved a lot of their operations to First Street. So thanks. That's all I got.
Mayor Lyle Smith, I didn't get really an answer about uniform signage for the parks.
So we have started the replacement of the signs in the different parks. You'll notice that when we open TSW and DC Lotterette, they will all have the standardized new signs that we're utilizing. So we're phasing the new signs in with the new parks. We're also looking at grants that we can actually pursue to offset some of those costs to continue the sign replacement moving forward.
But I really appreciate that because I think it helps with the identity of, part of our community of people, even people who are not from here and people who are from here are going to see that sign and sort of recognize that that's, our park sign. I love the fact that they're somewhat similar, or the design was considered that they use in the Columbia Gorge, because people see that and they really know that that's that particular area, and it's very identifiable, very simple. So thank you so much for getting to that little by little so that they all look alike. Because at one time we did have just those brown wooden ones with the white letters, but they just didn't hold up under the weather. They just fell apart, even though they look kind of cool.
Okay. Any other questions on the Pioneer Center? We'll move then to page 74 and 75, which is recreation programs. Once again, a budget that remains relatively consistent. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I guess I didn't. Nope, we didn't do one because it was so little. We have the 74,000. So this is page 74 and 75. You have concerts at 74,000, trail news at 53,000, programs at 34,000, events at 5,000. I think that one thing I'll say here is that the staff has been working really hard to try to identify programming that we can do based on the rules that we have in place right now, trying to be extremely flexible and providing programs to the community, especially as we roll into the summer, as school gets out again. So, at this point, it's almost like contingency plans on top of contingency plans, depending on what level we're in at the moment. So yeah, I guess with that, they're continuing to try to do their thing in a new world.
Mr. Mitchell?
Along that line, Tony, is that 74,000 concerts 2 seasons, and are we going to be able to have a season this summer?
Kendall, if you want to jump in on that one. I mean, we're planning. I mean, we know right now, depending on which risk level we're in, what the caps are. So we're trying to plan around, it's not going to be concerts in the park like we remember. If we can get to that stage this summer, we hope to be able to do something. It'll be a much smaller crowd associated with those. And Kendall, if you wanted to add anything to that if I'm missing anything.
Yeah, Tony, you're correct. We've been trying to look at every option that we have to still provide those services and make the necessary modifications. As of right now, we're playing it by ear. We don't know where we're going to be for the summer, but our plan is, the hope is that next summer we'd be back to normal and be able to offer all the services that we would normally offer.
Ms. Lugo?
Thank you. I've wondered if there's ever been any interest by the Oregon City Commission in including in its budget some kind of funding for an LGBTQ pride event. I've seen Clackamas County as a whole step up during Pride and do various events to show that it supports the LGBTQIA community. But I haven't seen any funding from Oregon City that would indicate such a level of support. Is there anything in the Parks and Rec budget for Pride Month, or is there any interest by the City Commission in funding this area?
Well, I can talk about the most recent in the last week that Mr. Conkle and I have been talking about, based on an email that I received. First of all, addressing events. As far as I know, there have not been any events, and COVID has put a real damper on our planning for this summer. So I'm sure if we wanted to consider an event for next summer, that could be on the table with some of the funds that are in here for community events. I was specifically asked about a proclamation for June and Pride Month, but I wasn't given any language. It would need to run by a number of people for approval to try to work on proclamation language. And at this point in time, we're so close to June, I actually punted it to a task to our brand new DEI task force. I thought that would, our community work group, I thought that would be a perfect thing for the community to work on to make sure the proclamation language was correct, was appropriate for our community. You read a bunch of proclamations, they're very centered on their jurisdiction. And so our proclamation process or procedure, I didn't know we had one. I read that was brought to my attention as well. And normally language is provided. In this case, language wasn't provided. So it was just a matter of timing and trying to pull it all together. I do think it's a perfect thing for our DEI work group to work on that language and work together and talk about. That's an area where I think that community group could talk about how we could support the LGBTQ community, Pride Month, what would they like for us to do? I don't think the city has had that. I'm not aware of the city or the city commission having a specific conversation about trying to do something. And I am aware of the county's activities, but that's kind of the conversations that's happened literally within the last 48 hours. So, and I can tell you the city commission have no idea what I'm talking about because they weren't in on that conversation. That's how fresh it is. Anyway, I'm really hoping that our DEI community can talk about that type of activity and how do we incorporate that into city operations. Commissioner.
I just wanted to say that I don't have any concerns about us looking at that. I know I'd like to ask our fabulous library director, who has been on many occasions doing these sorts of things through the library, bringing awareness to these particular areas of celebrations of those sort of things. And I believe you guys did something last year because I remember coming in because I was wearing a pride shirt when I walked in the door.
Yes, we typically do recognize, we do celebration for Pride Month. I'm proud this year we had an article in the Oregon Library Association Quarterly about our teen LGBTQ collection that we put together using input from the local community and from several youth groups. So yes, we're always happy to help in those efforts.
Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I mean, I support proclamations and all that, but we're a budget committee. Can we kind of keep moving on the budget?
Yes, I believe we will be.
I appreciate your comment, Casey, but she wanted to have a say about it. So I appreciate her feeling comfortable enough to bring that to this group to ask the question, and we will move forward on it. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Conkle, are there any other questions about parks or recreation?
Just the last page is for Parks and Rec is the dedicated park donations. It's all donations received are accounted for separately by donor restrictions or purpose. Not a lot to see in this one. Okay. If that wraps up Parks and Rec, we'll move to the library. The proposed budget funds the addition of a library safety officer to help address the needs of patrons and staff safety, and the addition of a library technology specialist that will assist library patrons with their technology needs. Decreases in operating materials and supplies will help offset some of the additional personnel services expenses. We had some discussion about this on the first night concerning the proposed library safety officer. Once again, this is a dedicated fund. There is the library district that funds a vast majority, almost the entirety of this. The city continues to support the library through $300,000 over the biennium, helping with the debt payment, as well as just, you know, I think it's important that the city continue to support the library moving forward with some general fund money because of the community service and amenities that it does provide there. Next. Any questions on this side? We did provide additional details on the breakdown of the repair and maintenance and operating materials that's on the next slide here.
Mr. Mitchell?
Sorry, couldn't get to the mute button. I should start by saying that I do appreciate everything our library does. It is a tremendous asset. The staff does a tremendous job. When I look at very high level, there on page 81, our total library expenditures are planned to go up 1.3 million. If you look back on page 67, our total parks and recreation expenditures are planned to go up $300,000. I know that almost all of the money for the library comes from dedicated funds, but there is a $300,000 transfer from the general fund. That's my understanding. And I guess I'm having a hard time with that when I know what we're faced in terms of issues in parks and recreation. And again, I know how great our library is, and I know our whole community appreciates it. But I also believe in averaging up. And if we've got other areas that are not perceived as well by our community and have other urgent needs, personally, I'm having a hard time with that $300,000 general fund contribution when we're, in my opinion, starving our Parks and Recreation Department.
So maybe the question is, what is the general fund transfer paying for?
Historically, we contributed funds in getting ready to build the building. You know, it's essentially, you know, whether that's to help pay off the debt service, or to increase the level of service that we can provide. At the end of the day, the library district, I think the expectations of the library by the community aren't being met by the funding that's available within the district. Greg, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Budget Committee members. I would also say my understanding is, as Tony said, that when the library, especially when the library building was built, there was a recognition that a good chunk of the dollars going to pay for the expansion were library district dollars. So there was money being taken away from operations to fund capital development. And my understanding was that there was, as Tony said, there was a commitment from the city to augment that, to help contribute to those to those costs. The other thing I would say is that I always want to be careful. The library district IGA does indicate that there are, you know, certain uses of library funds that are permitted. We want to be careful about. There's a prohibition against using any library district money for the payment of allocated costs that are directly related to the overhead of the operating, you know, expenses of the library. And so having some general fund contribution helps, you know, assure our citizens and our stakeholders that, you know, the library district funds are being used primarily for library district operations. So,
Commissioner O'Donnell, you're muted.
I agree with Mr. Mitchell. I'm a big fan of the library. My family is a user of the library, my grandchildren, my wife, myself. but they also know that they've implemented a lot of technology that should have made them more efficient. And the checking in and out of books, the way things are done, I hope those are reflected in their operational costs. And I'm not talking about dedicated funds. I mean, Mr. Mitchell is right. This is $300,000. What it's dedicated to do specifically is important. And if there is any latitude in moving some of that money around, fine. I'm not disparaging the library at all because of the services they provide, but I think Mr. Mitchell's comments are well founded. Thanks.
If I may, the other thing and Tony, Matt, please correct me if I'm wrong. And the other thing that I noticed in the budget that was a concern is that, yes, that general fund contribution has been in place for a while, but the general fund contribution, as I talk about the allocated costs, have gone up. And so the net general fund contribution that's coming back has gone down effectively every year. So that is something that we look at, and is, when we're looking at our revenue expense situation, it's something that's a bit of a concern. But
and starting 2 years ago, in the current budget, we reduced it. I think it was 100,000 over the biennium because of trying to reallocate monies to other departments as needed. It traditionally was up at 400,000 over the biennium 2 years ago. In the current biennium cycle, we did reduce it down. Just part of the history of how we got to where we're at.
And I would like to respond to Commissioner O'Donnell's. I would like to say that the investments that we've made in technology have greatly increased our abilities to serve our patrons and to operate efficiently. Like every public service, we are also faced with growing population, growing service expectations, growing usage, and it's consistently a challenge. I believe very strongly that our staff does a great job of meeting those needs, and we work very hard to make the most efficient use of the resources that we have available to us.
Commissioner O'Donnell, do you want to finish that line of?
I'm not here to criticize the library operations, but I mean, part of me thinks I watched what they had to do over the past calendar year, and their demands were different and in some ways increased and in some ways diminished. Were you able to affect any cost savings to the point you can carry any money forward from the previous budget year? Because I know it's hard for any one entity to give up any portion of their budget, but to me, it's worth reviewing. That's it.
Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, I just had a question for Mr. Williams on page 82, the second column under repairs and maintenance services. Says some of the software is related to the RFID annual maintenance and patron behavior tracking software. Is that a nice way of saying the don't steal the books things before you walk out, or is that something else?
No, that would be something else. So one of the things as part of having a library safety officer, it's important in libraries to be able to track behavioral problems, to be able to document them so that if we are forced to get to the point where we're considering exclusion or some other mitigation measures, that we have a good paper trail, a good electronic trail of the situations we've encountered. We would very much like to invest in a system that will help us much more easily track that. We've in talking with our behavioral health specialist, the OCPD homeless liaison officer. Also, having a system like that where there was more readily available information would really help us coordinate better with those departments. So that behavior tracking software, that's what that is referring to. The RFID annual maintenance, that's the radio frequency identification technology. That's what allows us to check out books, allows patrons to check out books just by scanning them. Both our materials handler and our self-checks have annual hardware and software maintenance costs that the vendor charges us. And so that's also included in that area of the budget.
The behavior tracking, is that exclusive to the library, or is that part of, does the police department have access to that, vice versa?
It's not something that we have yet. It's something that we've included in the budget as a proposal so that we can obtain it. It is a product that we're looking at. It's tailored towards the library industry, but in talking with some of our other colleagues that we would like to coordinate on some of these issues with, we think it could be something that would be useful to help them. The There are also rules about what, what information can be released from what agency, HIPAA rules and things like that. So we want to be cognizant of that.
All right, Commissioner McGriff.
Yes, I'm just trying to get, Mike, can you help me out of what it is that you are really asking? Are you suggesting that the $300,000 that's general fund to the library should be reallocated or reduced? Or, I mean, we've got different pots of money here. So my understanding, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but when I saw that, it's like you've got this big pot of money that the library district brings in, and then we as a jurisdiction need to make some contribution to that so that we kind of, I guess what I see is it's our skin in the game, so to speak. And Parks, unfortunately, doesn't have a dedicated district, which, I guess I'll go out on a limb and say I would be willing to consider us talking about that at a later date, about talking to our voters about funding the library, the Parks district, because it's all general fund and there's only so much general fund to go around. And like I said, during my tenure here, Parks was just getting it in the shorts every year during budget time when I worked for the city, to the point to where they were just operating on a bare bones budget. And it's time for, our community, and the survey said they value our parks. So I'm curious to see how much they value it. Would they be willing to, 5 cents on 1,000? I don't know. Just so anyway, so could help me out, because I think you're asking for something, but you're not asking it. And if I'm totally wrong, just tell me I'm totally wrong.
Well, I think it's up to the committee to decide how much, if any, of that $300,000 might be allocated elsewhere. I'm just remembering our discussion the other night with a commission goal related to the homeless issue, and what really is a pitiful amount of money going to something that I know our community thinks is an urgent issue. I don't think it's my place to propose a solution, and how much, if any, should be moved. That's up to the committee. But when I see that library expenditures are budgeted to go up 16% and parks 2%, that just doesn't equate to me. And that obviously that's a decision for the committee, whether all of that money or part of it should be allocated elsewhere. I wanted to point it out because it struck me as perhaps not putting the money where our more urgent needs are. Just assume for the moment that entire $300,000 wasn't there. You're still talking about $1 million increase in library funding over the biennium.
Well, okay, I'm still confused, so it's okay. We'll just.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, because I think you're asking the right question. I have the same question, and I'll piggyback off of that. Mr. Zook, or Greg, do you know if we have some itemized information from this current biennium or the biennium before that shows how much that the general fund was actually spent out of the library budget? Because it looks like to me the budget from this perspective that I can see is just how much we keep throwing into that pot, but I don't see anything that says so. If we throw it in, is it automatically used and it's gone to first, or what?
Yeah, we don't actually track that much. It gets intermingled with the money from the library district. So yes, you're right that the end fund balance has been growing. So, but we don't actually track, first in, first out type of activity on the general fund portion.
So you don't track what gets charged to that general fund, those general fund dollars, how those are spent within the library?
No, because it's basically one piece of the revenue picture for library. We don't actually take the expenses and allocate, this was spent out of general fund transfer versus library district. It's all one pot once it goes in.
So back to what Greg was saying earlier, it sounds like there was a commitment by the city to pay a specific amount toward building or providing a general fund contribution. What number is that?
Historically, like that was the 400,000 over the biennium. I'd have to go back and look at how many years prior to that we did that. I know that as part of this current budget cycle that we're in, we took it from 400 down to 300. Part of this also, as Greg touched on, was the internal services charges. As we have got a better handle on charging those. If you look on page 81, 2017-19 internal charges were 15,700. They went up to 91,000. Now you're looking at 200,000. So that's those supporting services, whether it's human resources, finance, general government. So we've done a better job of allocating the costs that each of these departments are receiving. Do we specifically?
The funds would be going the other direction.
Correct.
If that were the case, library would be paying the general fund back for finance and HR
and
instead of us transferring funds in.
Right, and that's what they're doing right now, is that they, so yeah, I mean, you have money coming back into the general fund for the general fund services, general government services that are provided. We have historically always contributed general fund in support of the library. Now, exactly, we don't track it down to, as Matt was saying, a specific expenditure.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, I'm in on this conversation all the way. I mean, if we're allocating to any entity within the city government a set amount of money, what is that money supposed to do? What does it do? Is it debt service? Where does it go? I understand when funds get commingled, they get lost in how they're allocated, but I think it's a valid question. The other thing I want to say as a general observation as a manager, it behooves every manager to make decisions on the difference of what do we need, what would we like to have, and what must we have. And for example, this system, I can't find the dollar amount associated with tracking behavioral. Are the events that numerous that we actually need a discrete system to do it? I mean, over the past year or 2 years, did we experience 6 events, 200 events, or whatever? I mean, do we truly need to make and I don't know what the value of the system is. Maybe it's small, maybe it's, I don't know, I'll leave that to Greg to tell me. So I don't like being so strict with the library, but I feel the need to. Thanks.
I can answer that quickly. I don't have the number of incidents right at the top of my head. I can get that for you. That system, that patron behavior tracking system, off the top of my head, is between $2,000 and $3,000 a year. So it's not a huge expenditure, but it is something that we feel is well worth having for the reasons I outlined before.
Okay, small money. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Lugo.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that when we have a narrative where we're talking about comparing budgets for one department versus another, we're limiting the narrative. General funds go to a whole bunch of places. We're not having a comparison of general funds for library versus general funds for police, or general funds for park and rec versus general funds for police. And I would just like to point out that the lion's share of general funds are going to the police department. The library is, to me, one of the most important services a city can provide. And I mean, I don't really see, when I was reviewing the budget document, that the amount that was allocated from the general fund seemed entirely reasonable. I do support the commissioner's inquiry into maybe looking at going out to the voters and asking if the voters would like to support Parks and Rec, more in depth through some sort of voter initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lugo. We've talked about that. I think that conversation is coming. Mr. Flesh.
Just back on the patron behavior tracking, even that's a small amount, could it be listed separately? It's not repair and maintenance, it's a new thing. And the reason I say that is because I'd like just the city commission at large to be aware and maybe kind of keep their eyes, maybe keep their behavior tracking on the library. That's all.
What were you saying? I just want to make sure you were saying you didn't consider it a repair and maintenance. It's listed into the, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Just for visibility purposes is why I asked that.
Yeah, there was something else in this budget that landed in repair and maintenance too in one of the other departments. And I remember thinking, that's not repair or maintenance. It seemed more like it was a software subscription or something like an annual, but anyway, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the accountant in me that knows sometimes things get buried when they shouldn't be buried in budgets.
And if I may, I don't want to speak for the finance department, but looking at the account structure in here, I believe the reason it's put in repair and maintenance is because that particular account is computer software and support, and that's just typically where annual software support and maintenance have gone. If there's a desire to break out physical item repair and maintenance and software maintenance and support in two different categories, I would punt to Matt and his team to help us make those coding changes in code.
Sure. As a new system, I've been an accountant for 20 plus years. I would not put it under repairs and maintenance. And again, it's a visibility thing to me. It's not about the money. It's a small amount. I just want it to not be buried and no one questions it ever.
I think that's good feedback. Thank you, Mr. Flesh. All right, any other questions or discussion about the library?
So are we making a decision on removing a portion or all of the general fund, or are we leaving it, or?
I'll speak up and say, for me, it's been difficult to tell from this conversation how much of it is needed versus how much of it is a tradition and carryover, because that's what we used to do, or we did it for biennia while we were building the building. And so that's, if I knew that there were extra dollars, if it were $100,000 of general fund and the library is doing very fine with their district dollars, I would absolutely support using those general fund dollars in our parks department, which is woefully underfunded. So that's where I'm at, but I'm struggling because I don't feel like I have enough information to make that call about how the general fund's being used. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, I totally agree with you, Mayor. I don't feel I have enough information as to what that money is allocated to, and I feel the same way. As the traditional contribution, or is there a need, and what purpose does it serve? And other than that, I'll tell you, I agree with Mr. Fletch. I mean, as one that's made capital expenditures, if we're going to amortize them or depreciate them, just as an accounting practice, if it's a discrete purchase, if it was something hard like a piece of equipment, we might want to depreciate it. So I agree with his accounting procedures. But more specifically, I agree with the fact that I don't feel that I have enough information on the $300,000. So I'll just parrot everything you just said and agree with it.
If I may ask, would it be helpful if we prepared kind of an impact of what not having that general fund contribution would mean for library operations and staffing and materials and services? Because I could certainly quantify that. To talk about what the impact would be of removing that general fund support. Well,
I'll say that I think, sure, that will be helpful, but I can't tell if if you're choosing to spend general fund on those items because we're providing it, or if those items could be paid for by the library district funds, which are targeted funds, which we have no ability. I mean, it's great. They should be spent on the library. So let's spend them on the library. So you can see what I'm saying. I can't tell if it's discretionary spending because we're providing it, or if there really is a need, and if other funds could be used. I mean, we're pinching and pulling from other funds and grants in every other program, including the police department, to try to pay for different things here and there. And I expect the library to do the same thing. And I'm not saying you're not. I love the library like everybody else, but that's where I'm at. Mr. Flesh, you're muted. You're muted.
I'm sorry. I think from a voter / community point of view, like we talked about the other night, if they were to look at the summary that Mr. Zook made of which departments personnel are increasing and, and how much, it's an open question. The library is up 17%. Are the other departments? And also, we have a fire district that the voters wanted to do, much like the library district. Do we give any general fund money to the fire district? I don't know. That's it.
I don't know the answer to that. Mr. Zook, do you know the answer?
We do not contribute to the fire department. They levy their own tax for their revenue.
So as a voter, we created that district or absorbed ourselves into it, whatever. I'm saying, well, I pay my property taxes for that fire district, and now we have a library district, but now the city is chipping in more. And I'm not sure if the average voter would like that. Maybe they would. I don't know.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, I wanted to add that we may not contribute monetarily to the fire district. We do own buildings that they are utilizing. I realize that they do pay some rent on them, and there's contracts about maintenance and those sort of things. So, we've contributed some land, we've contributed a building. In terms of the library, although the library district helped pay for it, I guess I feel from the standpoint of a patron and a citizen here, I feel that library is, I hate to sound so possessive, but that library is ours. And I'm glad everybody else gets to use it, but I look at it as the library in my town, and that's part of our contribution as well. I don't feel that the 300,000 is unreasonable. If we can reduce it as we go through over time, but again, making that contribution says to me, in addition to the building, as a taxpayer, this is what the city is contributing to this. It may be a small amount, but to me, it is offset by, and I'll just say it, by the service that we get from it. And it seems to me I understand what you're saying to a degree about the percentages of things going up and our parks department really suffering. Believe me, I am looking at ways in my head of how we can increase funding for the parks department. I don't want this to be a competition against one department against the other, because I've been through that already, and that never ended well. So I feel that what they have proposed is reasonable. And again, we are servicing, while the majority of us here, we are servicing a broader cross section of our community, and those patrons are getting something out of as well. Plus, they're also paying for part of the district costs as well. So, I mean, we're giving and we're getting back, I think, more than 2 to 1. So that's just my piece.
All right, Ms. Lugo?
Yes, you'll have to excuse my frankness. I understand that I'm not a city commissioner, but during this time of budget hearings, the state of Oregon has allocated us with the ability to, as citizen participants in budget review, to offer our input. The increase of 16% doesn't tell me historically how much a budget item, a discrete budget item might increase over a period of decades. I don't know what the relative increase of the library budget is this year as compared to what it was, say, 4 years ago. It may have only been 2% then. So without that information, it's really lacking. And I feel like we're doing comparisons of apples and oranges here. The library budget is this item that we've already had a chance to review and to look at. There's been ample opportunity to ask these questions. And I feel like right now comparing the library budget to the Parks and Rec budget is just an unfair comparison, quite honestly. I mean, I think the library deserves money, Parks and Rec deserves money, the homeless deserve money, housing deserves money. These are all priorities. And I'd like to keep the library funding where it is right now. Thank you.
Hey, Commissioner O'Donnell?
I think one of the indications of need is, was there any amount carried over? We all know that most institutions approach budgeting with a use it or lose it type of approach, and they try to spend their entire allocation. If in fact that there's a carryover, and tempering that with an analysis of what services we have to provide in the future, I think it's worth looking at. And as far as comparing different departments, I mean, those percentages can be misleading. I mean, we talked about this behavioral officer. That's actually a hidden cost that goes towards some of our homeless issues, to be quite honest. And then on the other hand, if the police department is at full strength and their only increase in expenditures because of cost of living allowances, that's a very different analysis than if another department is underfunded or understaffed. So I don't get all caught up in it. I mean, the numbers, you have to delve deeper than just the numbers themselves. Thanks.
All right, any other questions or comments about the library? Mr. Conkle, it doesn't sound like there's general consensus on any changes to the library budget. So from what I can tell.
Okay, I'll go ahead and continue. So next we move into community development. This is made up of planning and building. So the community development, the community development department is responsible for working with the community to guide growth and development within the city limits. The department performs long-range planning projects and community outreach, interprets and applies municipal code standards and appropriate comprehensive plan policies to promote development projects, interprets and applies construction codes and standards to approved projects, and implements the city's development policies and programs. The proposed budget includes funding to address the city commission goals, including $100,000 for development of a climate action plan, $10,000 for preparation of a plan to identify and implement housing strategies, and $20,000 to update the Oregon City Municipal Code to provide additional housing opportunities in the city, which is funded by transfers from the general fund. So we're getting into page 85 through 87 is planning in your budget book. As we had discussed earlier with the commission, we had also proposed a response to the damage to our tree canopy from the ice storm of $200,000. And we still have a parking lot study downtown that we're continuing to work on. So why don't we go to the detail on the next page. So here outlines the 3 goals that have been identified that I just discussed. The Metro Regional Travel Option Grant, the All-Star Grant, as well as our legal. So in planning, you typically see the higher legal. This is covering the Planning Commission meetings, the Historic Review Board meetings, as well as reviewing current land use applications, dealing with any land use application appeals that may come forward. just general legal advice that tends to come with current development. Any questions concerning planning?
Commissioner O'Donnell? You're muted.
Strike four. That's like the sombrero.
Yeah, yeah, the hat trick.
The hat trick.
A general question to Mr. Zook. I thought the other night he stated that not reserves, but contingencies were not by department, that they were almost centralized. Yet I understand the need for something like a dedicated fund to be allocated within the department, but I wouldn't think these monies are dedicated funds. Did I misunderstand his explanation that contingencies are centrally located or are not? Or are these numbers stated as contingencies within departments encompassed within the overall contingency number?
Thanks for clarifying. Let me clarify that. Contingencies are generally reserved as one amount per fund. I think the key word that you used when we were talking about the general fund was department. So think of it as contingency per fund. And so we get into the planning fund, they have their own contingency dedicated towards their operations. If you switch back to general fund, the general fund has one amount of contingency, about 8.1 million, but we don't allocate that 8.1 million out to certain departments. It's really strictly held at a fund by fund basis.
So are these individual departmentals captured in the general fund contingency, or are they their own monies that are separate and above from those that we state as general fund contingency?
They're centralized. They're not broken out by department.
All right. Thanks, I think.
Ms. Lugo?
Yeah, I just want to say while we're talking about the housing issue that I don't feel that the amount that we have in this budget is nearly enough to address housing concerns. I just want to tell you just very briefly, we had a dear friend who died recently here in Oregon City who was living on SSI. She was a senior citizen without family, and she spent the better part of the last 3 years living in different people's hallways, living in their spare room as long as they would have her. And her story is not the only story of people who are living on SSI and low income who cannot find affordable housing in Oregon City. As a community, I think that it behooves us to invest more in affordable housing in the city, because the amount of money that people receive right now through SSI is not enough to meet housing needs in our community. 10 years ago, it used to be that you could afford to get something here in Oregon City, but now, people who are extremely low income, there's no place in the city for them to live. And I don't feel like we're spending enough money on really addressing this issue. I'm not going to ask the commission to take any actions, but I do want to make that statement as a member of this committee.
All right, thank you, Ms. Lugo. Commissioner McGriff.
Well, I wanted to ask, I don't see anything in the budget here for ongoing training, like if any of our staff are AICP, you have certain certifications you have to keep up. Same thing with the building side. Is there any money set aside for training just to stay current? I mean, obviously you have to have certifications for building, but it seems to me that there are things that we can do to help make our staff more knowledgeable about what's going on. One of the trainings I took was, it was for building officials and planners, and it involved historic preservation. So they were able to work together to identify issues that were regarding building in historic districts and those sort of things. That was a very, very valuable training. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that I was trying to, matter of fact, I was trying to explain that a little bit this afternoon when Mayor Lyle Smith and I were meeting with the Governmental Affairs Committee. People are looking at the goals and they're looking at the amounts, and they're somehow making the equation that if we don't have a big pile of money for this, then that means we aren't doing anything. And to me, they're not really the same thing. We have a process to accomplish certain things, and we need to start sometimes not at the beginning, but other times we need to start at a starting place. So I understand what we're talking about in terms of housing, but Oregon City is not a housing developer. We're not going to throw money at trying to build something when that's not our expertise. I think the thing that we could consider in discussion with the community is partnering on projects where we maybe donate the land, or we've talked about a construction excise tax. We've talked about some other ways to have a fund where we could help with projects. The biggest asset we have as a city is that we own property that housing could be allowed on in a mixed use way. So to me, that would be a way that we could contribute to affordable housing by working with an affordable housing developer to do something like that. But we're not in the housing business. And if we put $50,000 in that budget or $200 million, we're still not in the housing business. It's not what we do as a city. We don't build housing, but we can help facilitate the process to get some housing built by working in partnerships. And I think that's what we have to our advantage. So understand that the $10,000 is for us to implement programs and processes by which we can allow for more affordable housing. Now, maybe there's something else we can do to try to, make sure that it is affordable by putting restrictions on some project that we join in. I know the city of Portland does that when they partner, that the rents have to stay at a certain level for, almost 20 years. So there's opportunities that we are not taking advantage of that we need to discuss outside of this that we could do. So to me, it's not the amount. We're using that money to get to a place where we can say, we have planned and zoned, and here's where you can do this.
All right, so her first question was about training for staff. I don't want to lose that one. Ms. Turway, do you have a response to that question about professional training and education for staff?
We do. The planning division budget has $1,500 per year for training. And that does include training for AICP and other certifications. Since it is a limited amount of money, we do a lot of online training, which is lower in cost.
If I could add to that, I was going to also share where that is on the page.
So where is that?
I would love to tell you. It's employee costs. I was going to say that the planning department is fairly smart, which might lend to why the training budget is a little smaller. All that being said, though, other employee costs is the general category for every department where that training would be. So that would include any kind of training costs, any travel to that event, et cetera.
And for everybody, just to make sure we're all on the same page, that's page 87. All right, Mr. Arnhart. Right as you were taking a drink of water, sorry.
Oh, we had a good time. For that 200,000, the tree canopy tree replacement, would those costs or some of the costs possibly be associated with FEMA possibly getting reimbursed since it's due to the February ice storm?
That's a good question. I don't know if tree replacement is reimbursable. I think we can clean them up. And Matt, I'm not sure if that's something else that we need to look into. We just received, so we've been tracking those costs. We had to divide them into public versus private. So remember, we opened up the cove, and when we took that private debris, that's typically not a reimbursable cost. So we were separating our expenditures to respond to that event. I know that tree removal, those type of costs are reimbursable. I don't think tree replacement is a reimbursable FEMA cost.
Tree reimbursement is not. Removal and stump grinding is, but tree replacement is not covered by FEMA.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that money, Laura, correct me, when we when we do developments and, they're putting in a subdivision, for example, you need to take out, X many trees as you're putting the road in. They're required to mitigate those trees at a certain ratio. If those trees can't be placed on property or another location, they pay for that tree. And so, some of this money, part of the money that we're using for the 200,000 is that developer funded tree replacement fund.
I agree with you, Kyle. They can tear it down and stuff, FEMA can, but they don't want to put stuff back.
Are there any other questions on planning?
We get another opportunity to try. Let me put it that way. We'll give it our best shot to get that money. Can't promise you though.
Yeah, you might consider thinking of the hazard mitigation. I mean, the state included drought and climate for the first time in the state's FEMA plan. So just wondering if it's hazard mitigation dollars or something like that, that, I don't know, we to think about that one. It's a good question to ask though. But yeah, Commissioner McGriff?
I was going to add, why don't we say that it's erosion control measures? Keep our soil from going away someplace else. They don't like to pay for landslides and stuff like that. So we can say we're putting in new trees to.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about the planning department?
Okay, Katie, you want to go ahead?
What are special programs? On page 87.
That's the 200,000 for the tree mitigation, certified local government grant, and comprehensive plan update.
I think it would have been clear if you had put special programs above it and then that stuff below it, because, oh, you have it below it. Okay, see, I saw special programs and I thought there was supposed to be something else on the bottom of that rather than on the top of it.
Okay.
We ready to move on to the building?
So now we have, the building fund, the building division, which houses in the community development department, operates under dedicated funding that requires revenues generated by permits to be utilized for building division expenses only. The building division anticipates sustaining increased permitting activities. A 2-year limited duration building inspector will help support the increased workload. Refer to pages 89 through 91 for additional information. Are there any questions about building? Pretty straightforward.
Just one.
Sure.
Just one quick question, Tony. It's kind of a balance sheet thing. Pass-through revenues are 400,000 and pass-through expenses are 400,000. Is that just net zero? We take it, we pass it through.
Yeah, when they apply for the building permit, that's where you get your school excise tax, I believe. There's another one. So yeah, I mean, that's traditionally kind of the area that we see. If it's 450, it'll be 450 out. I think we get 3% maybe for admin.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Mitchell?
I'm sorry to keep being a broken record, but $5.6 million contingency on a $9.1 million total expenditures, over 50%. I just keep being baffled by these contingency numbers.
This is a extremely limited, restricted fund. It can only be used for building related activities and expenditures.
And is that state law or is that our charter or what?
That is state law.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So hypothetically, help me understand, what would we spend this money on?
I think I saw, is Mike still on? Mike Roberts?
Yep.
Yep, I'm here, Tony. Let me get my camera
So
on.
Mike Roberts is our building official. He can talk a little bit about the restrictions placed on the usage of building funds by the state.
Yes, thank you for the question. So all permit monies that are generated to a building department are to be spent towards a building department administration, meaning inspections, plan reviews for buildings, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And those are dedicated funds through ORS 455-210 and to be spent only for that. So part of that is if you buy a permit today, we have to be able to do the inspections for the length of the project, whether it's 6 months from now or a year from now. You spend the money, we have to be able to provide the service. And that's where that revenue is generated from.
So if I'm representing the citizens or residents of Oregon City, this looks like an area where we could reduce the cost of permits and fees if we're building up a revenue pot that we're not spending. I'm just wondering hypothetically.
No, I understand. And normally historically, we have not had this kind of a carryover, or it's really started happening since about 2016 as the residential permit applications have gone down, the large scale commercial projects have gone up. Large scale commercial projects generate more revenue. The permits are based on the value of the project. So the higher the cost of the project, the greater the fee or the greater the permit fee. Whereas a single family dwelling generates about $500 to $5,500 in permit revenue, and that pays for all the inspections. Whereas a large scale project, say a $20 million project, could generate up to $400,000 just on the building permit and the plan review fee. But that pays for all of our inspections, the peer reviews that we have to have done by structural engineers. We pay for all that out of those fees.
So I guess part of this too, Mayor, what we saw was a little bit of a bump. You had multiple public bond measures passed. So you had Clackamas Community College with multiple large buildings that had fees associated with them. You had the high school and elementary school constructions that were going on. It was a little bit of an anomaly that all those bond measures passed at the same time, and those projects came in back to back to back to back that you see in the construction going on the community college site, as well as all the Oregon City School District sites. And then your typical additional commercial construction. I understand that, and Mike, correct me, I think some of these valuations are set at the state level on a square footage basis.
Yes, we're required to use the ICC, which is the International Code Council, the model code for the state of Oregon. They set a square foot valuation every year that takes effect April 1st. We don't set that, state of Oregon does.
And I guess I would just say, I was the community development director when we hit the first recession in 2008. And, at that point, I believe that the building department, I think we went through about 1.1 million in reserves, when you get that residential or it stops, we're not like Bend where we have 35, 40 planners and it's a very small crew. So it does fluctuate up and down depending on where we're at in that cycle.
Okay. Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, Mr. Roberts, I just want to make sure I understood you. Those rates for a permit are set by the state and we have no control over that. Is that correct?
The valuations are set by the state. Yes.
So if I'm building a brand new house, the cost of that permit is set by the state?
No, the that's yes and no. So if I can explain that, we have our permit fees in Oregon City, which are different from Clackamas County and Happy Valley. But all of our fees are approved first by the state Building Codes Division in Salem, and then by the city commission or the county council or county commission. So those fees are all set by the state, approved by the state. There's specific methodologies that we have to use to get to those permit fees. So it goes through a very rigorous review and approval process. And then the square foot valuation, two separate but related items, those are all set by the state. We have no control over those on how much the square foot valuations are per building.
Regardless of the value of the true building.
Yes.
Yeah.
As an example, we will value a single family dwelling at $250,000, yet that same single family dwelling is being sold for $500,000 or $600,000. So it's not an accurate valuation of the building.
Well, yeah, that's kind of market value versus other, but that's not really my question. My question was, does Oregon City have control over how much it costs to build a single family house?
Some control, yes. They do have some control of that.
So we could lower the fees as people are trying to rebuild and come out of the recession and COVID pandemic, since we have a $5.6 million reserve of a budget of $9 million.
If approved by the state of Oregon to lower your fees.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. McGriff.
Yeah, I was delighted to see on page 90 under accomplishments that you had continued cross-training employees to perform multiple types of inspections and become knowledgeable in various types of topics. Does that cross-training include cross-divisional training, i.e. the divisions in the community development department? Because I'd like to see something like that in the planning side so that there is some, there's cross-training. So I'm assuming I guess the question is there?
So twofold, if I could answer that. We have cross-training within our own division, whereas the people that have been hired since I've been here have started out as office specialists with no certifications. 5 of those employees are now certified building inspectors, plans examiners, and plumbing inspectors and electrical inspectors, and that includes our permit staff. So that cross-training, instead of going out and hiring specialized inspectors that only do plumbing inspections, I've been able to utilize the cross-training and use those same employees to be able to do, I can send one employee to do an entire house. So we do cross-train in the building department, building division, but as far as cross-training to do the same job with planning department, no, we don't do that.
I think one other thing I can add, I know one thing that Mike has done a really good job of was that historically Oregon City has always relied on Clackamas County for electrical inspections, residential and commercial. I mean, one of the goals was to bring that in-house for accountability, customer service reasons. So what that also did was we weren't paying the county as we traditionally have for a long, I mean, probably since we've had a building department, we never had an electrical inspector at residential or commercial level or a commercial plumbing inspector. So I mean, part of the migration has been, and this has been over several years, is how do we train our staff so that we can do and be accountable for all the inspections that we provide. And we're able to do a majority of those now because of the training that has gone on and the strategic hires that have been made to do that.
Yeah, I'm aware of that because my first electrical permit was by a county inspector some years ago. And I remember him asking me who installed this panel? Did you do it? And I looked at him, I said, do I look like I know anything about electrical? My question was, put it in the parking lot, that there be more cross-training between the divisions. So just a comment.
Yeah, and Mike, can you talk a little bit about, this is where we get into the restricted nature of the building funds?
It is.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about planners becoming inspectors, but that they have some knowledge of what each other does. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Well, to that, I'm sorry, let me back up when I say we don't do that. I'm sorry, I thought you meant as far as going to classes together and cross-training jobs. Building has reached out and helped with planning as far as in single-family dwellings, doing landscaping inspections, setback inspections, and things like that. We have done that.
That's what I was asking.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you meant formal training.
No, I didn't say classroom training.
Okay.
No planners want to be inspectors of electrical or anything like that, but the chief might be interested in some of that cross training.
And just to tag on to that too, we have made it a priority last couple of years, and we're still working on it to be more familiar with each other's jobs between planning, building, and public works development services. So the three legs of development as well.
All right, Commissioner Morrow.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious as to why in the building division permit activity for the future projected new multifamily permits, why it is so low, given that by the middle of next year, we should have a city code in accordance with HB 2001.
Well, so Mike, let me jump in real quick. When we talk multifamily, we're talking much larger than duplexes and triplexes. We're talking, COVID Edgewater in terms of multifamily. Historically, if, as we move through the year, Laura will send out kind of a update of all the permits for the year and a recap, and it has about a 10-year running line. And it's been historically extremely low in terms of true multifamily development in Oregon State. You know that living here. COVID Edgewater was the first significant multifamily development that we've had. We do have one coming up on Beaver Creek out there by the high school, but we tend to be a lot of single family residential.
Thank you.
I think there's one or two proposed, which is probably reflected in those numbers.
Yep, Beaver Creek and 213 potentially. Yep.
I have a question back to this, the budget where you say there's a proposed budget includes a 0.25 FTE increase for part-time plans. So back to this contingency conversation and the amount of budget that's there. So I hear a lot in the community about increasing the time it takes to process a permit, as well as the cost for permit fees. And I still believe, I know, Mike, you said that the state has to approve the fee, but I still think the city, though, has a piece of that fee that could potentially be reduced. And so my question, are there ways in which the permitting part of development in our city could be improved by using funds that are clearly available, by either adding staff that's needed to help improve the permitting efficiencies or processing times, or if there are pieces of that building permit fee where the city does have control that could potentially be reduced?
There is, and without throwing any other divisions or departments under the bus, we have a building department is required that we have a 10-day turnaround time on an application for building applications, not over-the-counter mechanical permits and things like that. So when a house comes in, we have 10 days to review that. So when an application is made to community development, the clock doesn't start ticking until it reaches the building department. It doesn't reach the building department until it has been cleared through development services and planning. Once it gets through those two divisions, we have to respond to it within 10 days. And we meet those timelines consistently. So even though the application might sit here feels it's sitting there for 6 months, it's going through its land use process first or development services process, sometimes simultaneously, before it even gets to us. But it's the word building permit that people hear, and that's what they feel it takes long to get a building permit, and it's not really a clear picture of that. Same with the fees for a single family dwelling. A permit is upwards of $40,000, but the actual permit, without all the other pass-through fees, as was mentioned with Metro and the school excise tax and things like that, the actual building permit is only $5,000 or $5,500. But people still hear the permit word and they associate that to be the building permit cost.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll leave it as, I assume if you felt like you needed additional staff, now would be the time to say it, or you would have brought it up in parts of this budget discussion. Because I see you're doing an increase of 0.25 to cover some part-time help. That's a really small amount. And so anyway, I just wanted to highlight that and make sure that you're having plenty of opportunity to make sure that your department is able to fulfill its duties when clearly there's funds that could potentially fund additional people to help city services be provided efficiently. So
I appreciate that very much. And if I could just say that, with where we're at right now, with the ebbs and tides of building and the cost of materials going up and our weekly building officials meetings, we're talking about that. And people are hesitant to, which I followed suit, to add new positions instead of going out and getting part-time help. Our part-time help that is being proposed is a structural engineer, to go out and to hire a structural engineer and then not be able to afford them in a year or two. Is I would rather go part-time first and see where we can go with that. And that's why I've tried to utilize existing staff by cross-training them, so we don't have to go out and hire people and have to, unfortunately, not be able to use them later and have to lay them off.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Building department didn't know they were going to get all these questions. How about he was like, I'm going to slide under the radar.
That might be the first building department questions I've ever seen.
Yeah. Good job, Mike, though. All right. You ready to move on?
Yes.
Our favorite.
All right, so we're into engineering. So engineering is located on page 97 through 100. It's responsible for the planning, design, construction, and mapping for Oregon City's public infrastructure, including capital improvement projects, development projects, and asset management. The pandemic has contributed to much apprehension and uncertainty, which slowed the rate of development. This budget reflects the downturn, as well as a slower recovery in the second year of the biennium. As such, engineering revenues have been proposed at around 70% of the previous year. Don't know that I have a whole lot additional for engineering. If anybody has any questions on the overall engineering budget on pages 97 through 100.
Ms. Lugo.
I do have a question. I'm wondering if the city has.
Oops, we lost you.
Your audio cut out. Can you start over?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I was just wondering, has the engineering department ever done a structural engineering survey of Oregon City's buildings to see how many of the buildings would survive a Cascadia style level 9 earthquake?
No.
Are you talking about unreinforced masonry buildings?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much most of them downtown.
Thank you.
It's a good question. I think, Tony, you answered no, right?
Not that I'm ever been aware of. No.
Do you have any follow-up, Ms. Lugo?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, what is the interest income of $34,000 for the biennium? How's that generated? Page 97.
So your question was, how's the interest income generated?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of the city's money is pooled into an investment account. And so by virtue of them being a separate fund, the monthly earnings that we receive are allocated out to all the funds based on their fund balance. So that is how the engineering fund receives interest on their working capital balances.
Did I miss that line in other departments?
I don't know.
Because it seems unusual that one department would have, oh, okay, I see it on, I do see it. So maybe I just didn't pay attention to that. I wasn't expecting to see interest being generated, but I see it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions? Ms. Lugo?
I do have a follow-up. So I'm wondering, within the budget, has the city ever done any planning for what we will do? I mean, we know that there's going to be a Cascadia level earthquake sometime in the future. It may be in the next 50 years, it may not. But have we incorporated planning into our budgeting for addressing the kind of issues that we're going to face when that happens, with our sewer, with our roads, with our public buildings? Do we have any kind of contingency fund for addressing that? I guess I'm bringing it up because to me, it seems like an engineering question.
You know, I guess, I don't know if Chief Ban wants to jump on as well. I think the catastrophic devastation from a Cascadia event will be significant. You will be into a federal declaration for rebuilding. We do not have enough money to rebuild our buildings. What we have done is invested in like our emergency operations center to be able to withstand that type of an event. Yeah, if that one hits at the level that they predict, it will be significantly devastating.
Tony, if I could just take a second to acknowledge, I think it's an excellent question, Emma. The industry that you may not know, but for public works in general, America's scorecard, if you will, or report card, if you will, is pretty low with public infrastructure. That could include anything from transportation to utilities. So generally, folks love they use public works infrastructure more than they realize. They probably value their cell phones a lot more than they do their water lines, for instance. So it's a super good question. I think we do, as an industry, whether it be through the work that Jim's staff do in emergency management or my staff do with emergency management, we do what we can to plan for that. But I agree, in a big event on the West Coast, like a Cascadia event, we're going to be looking for help from jurisdictions outside of our organization, and we're going to expect to see some major help from the federal government. And we can continue to hope for federal spending on infrastructure, which used to happen more than it does today. So it's a challenge for local communities to keep up with the real cost of maintaining and rebuilding infrastructure. And our new standards are better with regard to that. Or we like our water lines, for instance, they used to be slipped together, and now they're bolted together, if you will. They're rigid in that sense. Same with our other utilities. So I think we're doing a better job. Obviously, seismic retrofitting is happening in a lot of ways around a lot of communities, including ours.
Yeah, and Jim, I don't know if you want to talk about it. We certainly learned a lot, both from the fires over last summer. I mean, we've dealt with the slides at Forest Edge. We've dealt with the fires. We dealt with the ice storm. And we learned things through each of those and how we respond and what some of those holes are going to be, whether it be transportation wise, infrastructure wise, communication wise. So, I mean, you know, Jim, I don't know if you want to add to that. I mean,
I would just say,
we definitely see those things in what would be in a micro event, what that macro event would look like.
I think so. There's a ton of training that we do in terms of talking about, you know, and it's such an unknown that the best we can really do is sort of talk about scenarios, do tabletop exercises. We as a group in the county do things like exercises on dams up the Clackamas were to fail. What effect would we have down here? Emergency management, there's the long-term, you know, what is going to take, if we had an event that big, it would be a long time to do cleanup. And we are always learning as we go. This ice event was actually one of the most trying events of all the events we had, because it challenged so many things in terms of getting fuel. We got to test our brand new generator up here, which worked and kept our building running. But we're pretty informed by that, just in terms of how are we in the first week and month after an event, able to make sure that everybody has basic needs. We've got the hospital working, we've got transportation running, and then the longer conversation, I think, is what John and his crew take care of. Even on this event, there's some rewiring we're doing on our generator. There's conversation about our water that resulted in that, and looking at generators there. So we're constantly trying to learn from the events that happen here. And so it's, but yeah, that's a long conversation.
But I guess to your question, do we have the ability to rebuild everything? No. I mean, it'd be a community, federal, state level response.
Mr. Lewis, since you're on, were there any low-hanging fruit items out of the natural hazard mitigation plan that was recently updated last year or year before? I know we have action items or mitigation items listed in there. Do we ever circle back to that plan and see if there are budget items that are in that plan that should be in this budget?
You're on mute, John.
That's a great question. We do circle back to the natural hazard mitigation plan. We're doing a risk and resiliency study right now that was called for in the natural hazard mitigation plan for water, for instance. So our intent out of that is to see a relatively long list of recommendations, a little bit more detailed. Well, I hope a lot more detailed than what's in our natural hazard mitigation plan, that would be, more specific to water, but any kind of risk, whether it be natural hazard or whether it be cyber security, anything like that. So we do a lot of that. We're pretty heavy into our flood plain management and making sure buildings that are, we work a lot with Mike Roberts and his group on buildings in the floodplain and trying to, mitigate that through, floor foundation certifications and just making sure that those buildings are built appropriately. So there's always something more we could do there, Mayor Lyle Smith. And I'm just trying to recall specifics in this budget that derive from the natural hazard mitigation plan. I may need to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, it's kind of tag teaming off of Ms. Lugo's question. I say we, government in general, has a tendency to create these plans and we stick them on a shelf and we forget about them, and there's good work that goes into them. And I'm not suggesting that you do that. I say we, a proverbial we in government, because it happens everywhere. But the planning for an event like this takes a lot of work and, inch by inch. But all right. Anything else on engineering?
Unless there are questions. So we'll move to the transportation fund, starting on page 101. This fund accounts for two organizational units: transportation and pavement maintenance. General transportation expenditures, including staffing, materials, and services for general maintenance and constructions, are funded by gas tax revenues and Clackamas County vehicle registration fees. The pavement maintenance fee fund funds the annual pavement repair and roadway construction contracts. These revenues and expenses are kept segregated for accountability. The proposed budget includes $20,000. It's an actual total of $40,000 split 50-50 between rates and system development charges for the transportation system plan to meet commission goal number 2. The plan will create a prioritization of projects that maximizes multimodal safety and connectivity in the community. Materials and services include the pavement maintenance program, which includes $1.2 million of contracted services and materials. It also contains $322,000 for running the elevator, which is funded by a transfer from the general fund. The capital outlays includes $1.4 million for traffic signal installations, turn lanes, and pedestrian improvements, $1 million for Malala Avenue, and $5.5 million for roadway construction, $1 million for Trillium Parkway roadway rehabilitation. The additional capital projects can be found on pages 151 through 155 of the budget book.
Did you mean pages 100 to 105?
So I think we have, I think the capital list is at the back. Oh, did I send you the one?
Okay. You're right.
I think, did I send you to the wrong page?
No, well, it says capital improvement program 51.
So try
Okay.
153 more specifically.
Okay. Ms. Lugo.
In the event that the Abernathy Bridge does become a toll bridge, is there anything in the budget that reflects strategies or ideas for how to deal with the increased traffic congestion, which is anticipated in the event of that tolling? No.
No, there's not. I think part of the work that the Oregon Department of Transportation is doing and looking at that tolling project, incorporated in their scope of work, is looking at the impacts to surrounding roadways. So for us, that would be, Highway 213, Highway 99E, 43 Bridge. So we're part of those conversations to identify the areas that would be impacted, and out of that are going to come, what are those impacts? And then we would probably then at that point start to look at how do we start to mitigate those impacts.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add, there's quite a bit of lobbying going on right now on that topic. The Metropolitan Affairs Consortium I just saw the letter yesterday, trying to lobby for funds that could go to local jurisdictions. Even if they are going to toll and generate a revenue, allow local jurisdictions to apply some of that money to local roadways, but there's no approval for any of that yet. So it's an active conversation. Any other questions? I just have a comment for Mr. Lewis on this budget. I think I said it a couple of months ago. We need to be very clear about which projects are being targeted with those vehicle registration funds for a variety of reasons. So I don't know how our budget is being planned in that sense, and I don't know if those funds are just all going into one big bucket. But I think it's important for the community conversation that our community knows where those vehicle registration funds are going. And so I don't know if you know that, but it would be really helpful if you do know it, if you could share that information.
If you want it tonight, I'll have to dig a little bit.
No.
But we've actually, okay. Thank you. Then we do know. The county's actually asked us for that as well, because as you know, they've talked about maybe repealing that vehicle registration fee, which would be big for us in the sense that most of that money is focused on a lot of the things that we've heard from the commission, which is, more walkable or projects that are alternate modes of beyond driving. That's not to say that that's true for all of it, but that the one thing that we struggle with is the portions of projects that aren't SDC funded, right? So we may have a project and an element to that project, let's say 40% of it's SDC funded. The other 60% is funded through other means. And, our gas taxes are pretty limited to, our day-to-day operations, and our PMUF is dedicated pretty specifically to pavement maintenance. So there's a pretty big gap there that still needs to be filled. And while that vehicle registration fee doesn't completely fill it, it sure is a nice shot in the arm and something that's been helpful. So we do have the list. We did share it. We can, I'll make a note of that. We'll make sure we're getting it in our social, sharing it in our social campaign, as well as, one of your goals. And one of the things that we're pretty focused on is having that community discussion about how to prioritize some of these, alternate mode projects, I guess, if you will, rapid flashing beacons, sidewalk extensions, bike lanes, those kind of things. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that fund was a perfect target for those types of projects. I just want to make sure that if we weren't sure that this was a comment for Mr. Zook, to make sure that there is a need to make sure that those fees are being tracked, of how that money is coming from the county and how we're spending it locally. But it sounds like you have that under control. So
I will say, I would like to add that there's about 600 to 650,000 per year in this current biennium, reflected in anticipated vehicle registration fees. So
it's projected revenues.
Yes, yes. So that's, just to give you an idea of the scope, John would have to provide the specific project list, but that's the revenue side of it.
Pretty good chunk of change that's coming into the city for those fees, and I know we're using them, and I know we're using them well, but we need our residents need to know how we're spending those dollars. They're paying those fees, and we need to make sure we're very transparent of how we're spending those fees and that revenue that we're collecting. So, all right. I don't see any other hands or anything, so we can move on. If anybody wants to take a break, please holler or raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to keep trying to moving us forward. I see Commissioner McGriff. Is there anybody else that would like to we want to take a 5-minute break, 10-minute break? Yeah, I think that would be good. We've been doing this for a couple of hours now. It's 8:35 roughly. So why don't we take a 10-minute break and come back at 8:45, and we'll see how far we can get in the next few minutes, and then talk about next steps. All right, so it looks like we have everybody back. All right, so I will call the budget committee meeting back to order from our recess. And Mr. Conkle, if you want to pick it back up, I think you were probably starting water, I think.
Yes, thank you. So page 105, we'll skip back to water. The Water Utility Division operates and maintains the city's potable water distribution system, including distribution and system maintenance. The source of potable water supply for the city is surface water from the lower Clackamas River, which is drawn and treated by the South Fork Water Board. South Fork is a wholesale water supplier that is equally owned by Oregon City and the city of West Lynn. The proposed budget includes approximately $3.9 million in water purchases from South Fork, a decrease in consumption based on the prior biennium and 4% annual rates, and approximately $6.9 million in capital projects, including pipe replacement and upgrade projects. The upcoming budget includes $30,000 for a comprehensive review of the city's water system development charges and utility rates, which coincides with Commission Goal number 2. Are there any questions concerning the water fund?
Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, I was just curious on the ice storm. I don't remember the specifics, but there was potential that we were going to have to cut back or stop using water because of pumping. Is there anything in here that is addressing that issue?
That issue is related to our wholesale provider, South Fork Water Board. We didn't notice, and John, you can come in, but I believe that the local transmission lines were sufficient. It was getting the water from our wholesaler to the city that was the issue. I know we're going a little bit out here, but I know several commissioners sit on South Fork Water Board, and they could probably address that.
That's
a little better
you.
than I could.
Thank you.
All right, so I think he said he doesn't need clarification. He got the clarification he needed. Ms. Lugo.
Are there any unfunded mandates which the water board anticipates in the next 2-year period that are going to affect Oregon City residents? Are there any like major capital outlays that are going to be required of Oregon City residents to pay? Can you address that question with any certainty?
Like state mandates or?
No, I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't ask the question properly. Do you anticipate that there will be any additional costs that Oregon City residents are going to like?
Sure. Yep, that helps. Thank you. Thank you. So one of the things that we've been talking about the commission with is that there's a charter limitation on how much water rates can go up a year. It's at 3%. And so what we've seen is that the deferred maintenance associated with keeping up our system is falling behind relative to the rates that we can generate to make the upgrades that are necessary. So we've had discussions with the commission and looked at going out to the voters in November for a potential charter amendment to be able to increase the water rates higher than the current charter limitation for a set amount of time in order to, over a 20-year horizon, be able to catch up with the deferred maintenance that we're starting to see in our water system.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Commissioner McGriff.
Well, since Mr. Conkle raised it, I would like to know if our 2 esteemed South Fork Water Board commissioners have anything to add to the discussion. I would be most interested in hearing from both or either of them.
About something specific? Do you have a question more specific?
Just about the coordination of services and how things are related to from South Fork to Oregon City.
I could probably help if.
Hey, John, let's let the people who are on the board address it, please.
I don't really know exactly what to answer, but in regards to some of the questions, in terms of expenses to taxpayers and water in general, our water treatment plant is going through a process of expanding and doing some work on its facilities. So we are in the process of fulfilling the master plan and building a new chemical feed building that will be coming in the future soon. Frank, well, and there is some expenses at South Fork in terms of chemicals and changes in water requirements and stuff like that at the state level that was kind of mentioned. So, Frank, can you think of anything else at the South Fork level that we need to be?
Other than answer Mr. Fletcher's question, we actually already have a dual redundant system behind a system. And also the component of we're actually pricing out generators to provide our own power over a prolonged period of time to not rely on others. But in general, South Fork as an institution is essentially currently debt-free, well-managed, and does a great job. I mean, when you look at that, what's referred to as a water bill, which is a utility bill, the smallest component of it is the actual water itself. So.
Right. Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, so I see a contingency of $7.4 million. I'm just wondering why that's not tapped versus asking for more money.
Mr. Lewis, what's the total capital amount in the master plan that we're trying to raise money for? It's like, I want to guess 45 million, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's about twice that. It's about an $80 million shortfall. Some of that's SDC funded as well, but it's an excellent question though, Mr. Flush. I think one of the reasons I believe, and maybe Matt, you can kind of speak to this, is we plugged some of the federal funding that's in this fund. Is that correct? So there was a $5.6 million plug in the water fund based on the American Recovery Fund, and so that number's a little, it's off by, in my mind, it's off by 5.6 million from what we were really planning. But we think that's the right place to put it until we know a little bit more about that. But I guess the other thing that I want to make sure that the committee understands is the water fund has a backlog of what I would call major projects: transmission mains, reservoirs, pump stations, that are both funded through rates and through SDCs. So the idea is the growth pays for its share, which you will see in the SDC fund, and the commission we're moving forward with SDC increases as well. And then, the rate side of that is the piece that we're dealing with here in the plan is for in November to take a ballot initiative there. So we're ramping that up. But we've got a lot of unfunded capital needs in the water system.
Not to beat the message about the ARPA funding. So you saw throughout the budget, we included some ARPA funding that we thought was applicable to TRT. We included some ARPA funding that we believe is gas tax. We included some ARPA funding that we believe is broadband eligible. There were 3 pots of ARPA funding, and the last one was water, stormwater, broadband. So we're pretty confident that if we're just completely wrong, that money can certainly go into the water distribution system. And so that's where, once we get better guidance, we can have a conversation. Do we reallocate those funds based on the guidance that we received to other areas, whether it's, it could be applicable to general fund and we reallocate those funds, or do we continue to put that money into the water fund, knowing that that's one of the biggest liabilities that we have as we go out and have this discussion about what do we do with rates and the charter amendment. So really it was very clear that water was an allowable expense. So we put the remainder of that ARPA funding into that fund.
Mr. Lewis, I have one question. I don't see any other hands raised. I see in your accomplishments, you mentioned the site evaluation for the new Thimble Creek Reservoir. Is there any actions in this next biennium on that particular siting? I don't remember that we actually found a new site for that reservoir. Am I thinking of the same thing with that line, the right thing with that line item in the budget?
Yes, I'm sure you are. So we are looking at a site right now. Currently, we're doing a site evaluation study. We're hoping that determination, at least on an analysis level, is positive, and then we would bring that to you for authority to move forward with purchase. And I think the direction we've gotten from the city commission has been to get after it and get it done. So we're trying to do that.
Okay, and there are funds in this budget for that?
Yes.
Move item forward?
Yes.
Ms. Lugo?
So for the average Oregon City voter, how are you going to make the case for an $80 million capital outlay? Considering that it's generally voters support bond issues and they support infrastructure. But if you're talking about $80 million in infrastructure, deferred maintenance, how are you going to make that argument in a way that the Oregon City voters will approve it?
That's a real good question too. It is going to be a difficult measure, and we need the support of committees like this and other committees, the commission for sure. But one of the things that I've also heard from a range of people that are on this meeting here that, we need to do that right. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is hiring what would it be? Someone to help us form a public information campaign that would help convince the voters that that's a important asset that needs to be invested in. But I agree, it's there's never a great time to raise rates, and people could argue that now is not a great time to raise rates. A lot of that, by the way, that 80 million is, like I said, funded by new development. So I just want to be super clear to that. I don't remember the exact split between new development and the fees that they pay whenever they build a house or a commercial property. They pay a significant amount of fees and a significant amount of water system development charges. And so there's a big portion of that that's funded through that. So we'll put together we've already shared with the commission some of the rate proposals, and we'll be bringing more of that forward as we get closer to the election, and hopefully have a positive and convincing message to share with the community.
Thank you.
Mr. Flesh?
Yeah, did I hear you say that you're gonna hire or spend on someone to support this measure?
It's a firm that does polling and does community outreach messaging kind of work.
Okay, so you're spending department dollars for that. Is that proper use of, water fees have to be spent on water projects. That seems like a lobbying public relations thing to me.
I think the city has a positive message to tell whether we're pursuing a vote of the people or not. And so we're going to rally that public message, positive message around, those kind of measures, not necessarily a lobbying effort. It's really trying to make sure the folks know who they get their water from, what that water funding is used for. So, just like any other district or utility, kind of sharing the message about the service we provide and the value of that service.
But is a piece of that work, though, would be for the ballot measure.
Sure. Yes, definitely.
So I think what Mr. Flesh is asking is, can we be a little more clear on which fund is actually paying for that project? Is it a general fund or is it transportation dollars or?
It's water fund.
The water fund.
Or water, sorry, wrong infrastructure.
Yeah, it's water fund.
Yeah, I mean, the city of Portland has gotten a lot of pun intended hot water about spending water funds that are in statute have to be spent on water, and they've tried to promote water conservation efforts, and as wonderful as those things might be, it was found against the law, against the statute. So I think the commission may want to keep their eyes on that, because I know some groups in the community will be.
Thank you,
As far as I know, we are within the law with regard to that kind of expenditure.
Well, we'll double check. I'm sure that's a contract that will have to come before the city commission. So if it's over 50,000 though, but maybe not be over 50,000. Do you know?
Yeah, it's not over 50,000, and we're in the process of doing it right now.
Tony, my understanding is it is, and it's on the city commission agenda for.
Oh, it is? Okay. I thought it was
tomorrow.
Barney Worth one. Yeah.
Sorry, it was approved last night.
Okay, thank you. There you go.
On the consent agenda.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie.
All right. Any more questions? All right, Mr. Conkle.
Thank you. The wastewater utility division maintains the city's wastewater collection system. The city's wastewater collection system includes 14 pump stations and 136 miles of both force main and gravity pipes, all of which serve over 10,900 customers. Once the wastewater is collected, it's treated by the Tri-City Service District. The proposed budget includes $11.1 million of pass-through payments for wastewater treatment and system development charges received from city customers and remitted to Tri-City. The budget also includes funding to implement the Infiltration and Inflow Reduction Program, or I&I, beginning with high priority areas in the McLaughlin neighborhood, Settlers Point Drainage Basin, and Kenema neighborhood. The budget includes $3.8 million for the construction phase of the Rivercrest Basin. Total capital outlays of $13.1 million include $775,000 in pipeline renewal and replacement, and the details are found on pages 109 through 112 of your budget book.
Ms. Lugo.
Yeah, first, I just want to say that I'm so glad that we have wastewater treatment, because when you look at how life used to be in ancient Rome and most ancient civilizations where they just jumped all that stuff out in the street, this is great. But I am wondering, like, one of the things that I work in Portland, and so what I see in Portland all the time is I see these things, like they stick them in the middle of the street, and they're like a swale, and they're designed to sort of do like catchment for like toxics and stuff. And I see them all over Portland, and I think that's a great idea. That's a great use of space, but I've never seen that in Oregon City. Is there a chance that we might consider kind of looking at what they're doing up in Portland and maybe trying some of that for wastewater treatment here in Oregon City?
I totally agree. And maybe, so I think that's treating stormwater versus wastewater. So we got stormwater next. So how about we get to that question after we get through this one?
You know, you just made Mr. Lewis's day because like nobody asks about swales and stuff, catch basins and in the streets. So anyway, all right. I don't see any questions from the group.
And unfortunately, she's right, because I could probably name them on one hand here.
All right, stormwater.
Oh, sorry. On the stormwater. The Stormwater Utility Division maintains the city's stormwater management system, which includes conveyance, flood control, and pollution remediation and reduction. The division just completed its master plan update. A rate study and a system development charge analysis was completed to determine the needs of the system. Currently, the budget funds outfall rehabilitation at the Barkley Hills Sanitary Sewer Pump Station and other outfall projects determined from the outfall assessment. Commission goal number 2 is addressed in the upcoming budget, which includes $27,000 for a comprehensive review of the city's stormwater system development charge and utility rates. So John, you want to talk about a little bit about storm swales?
I would love to, thank you. Yes.
John, you have 3 minutes.
I pay attention to those same kind of facilities. You know, Portland has been kind of a leader in that effort, as well as Washington County and Clean Water Services. So they've learned a lot about those, and they've made improvements. You know, as we all do. If you're on the bleeding edge of those kind of facilities, you may have made some mistakes, but we've learned from others' mistakes, I think, and we have a few of those in town. We're going to have more. That's become, you know, kind of a leading method of both detention and water quality. So a lot of our new subdivisions, you're seeing them. So the one that I just drove through and it's got on my mind right now is Abernathy, which is up off of Holcomb, up near the edge of the city limits. There's quite a few of them up there. And so we've got standard details for those now. And, you know, it's a little harder in what we call retrofit areas. So say for an existing neighborhood, trying to make them work in that area. It's also hard when we're in steeper areas where they really don't have the opportunity to kind of let that rainwater percolate into the system. So there are some challenges in Oregon City with that kind of facility, but we're on it. And we're going to see more of those. And
I've been really impressed with the ones that I saw at CCC. Those were really
exactly. That's the other thing, is the development community is building more of those, probably more of those than the city is. But if you know, stormwater rates is another conversation that the commission's been having, and you know, that there's a big capital program behind stormwater rates, and a lot of those are retrofits or repair of systems that exist today that the city will be working on. And I think that will also include some of the kinds of facilities that you're talking about.
Okay. Mr. Lewis, can you remind me again where Scatter Canyon, is that Scatter Canyon project? Before, and I couldn't find it in one of the emails.
Yes, Scattering Canyon is in the municipal cemetery, and from the wrong name, but it's one of the drainage outfalls that basically picks up the neighborhood streets and pipes it through the cemetery and then dumps out on the edge of the cemetery. So right behind the mausoleum, there's a kind of a deep canyon there, and
out of Mountain View Cemetery.
Yes, Mountain View. Sorry. Yes.
And then goes into Newell Creek Canyon.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I can only imagine what the name went back in the day. Scattering Canyon.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, I know.
I don't see any other questions.
We're on to system development charges. SDCs are charged as part of the permitting process for new development. The purpose of the charges is to fund future capacity increasing projects as required due to growth. Oregon City imposes and expends system development charges according to Oregon law. As mentioned previously, funds are maintained separate from each of the 5 divisions collecting these charges. The proposed budget includes $20,000 as a match for the $40,000 for the transportation system plan to complete Commission Goal 2. The plan will create a prioritization of projects that maximize multimodal safety and connectivity in the community. In addition, the proposed budget includes $100,000 to update the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. The city utilizes the master plan to begin developing strategies for acquisition and development recommendations. The proposed spending by division is shown on pages 117 through 122. And some of the major investments are shown on this slide right here.
Mr. Lewis, is that land purchase, is that the set aside for the new reservoir? Or is that land purchase line item, Mr. Zook?
That is a parks.
Land purchase.
That's a parks land purchase. So Highway 213, obviously transportation, Mountain View, water, Wesley, Lynn, Filbert, land purchase is parks, Malala Avenue. I forget if that was water.
We do. So Mayor Lyle Smith, you asked me earlier when we were on the water budget if we had funding in that budget for implementation of the Thimble Creek Reservoir, and I said yes. It's actually out of that reservoir would be built 100% with SDC funds. So while it is in the budget, it wasn't in the water budget. That was my mistake. It is in the water SDC budget.
So it should be on that slide then, right? We're on SDCs, right?
Right. So it's, I don't know the details that are in the slide, but there's a lot of spending in, out of the water SDC fund that are rolled up kind of in that. So that 4.5 million there includes some.
Oh, is that the Fairway Downs?
Right. Yeah. So
okay.
we listed it as that in the budget, and then we've since kind of decided the naming is a little confusing. So we went to the Thimble Creek.
Right. Okay. Ms. Lugo.
So I noticed that it's not in any of the systems development plan, but it's still something that I think should still be kind of on the broad horizon view for Oregon City. And that's that, has the city commission or the transportation planners had any sort of coordination or communication with TriMet around potential expansion of MAX into Oregon City? I know that 10 years ago, we never would have had this conversation, but times are changing. And this is something that is going to continue to come up from time to time. Could you address that question just briefly?
Actually, 10 years ago, we were having this conversation. And now
I know. Thank you, Rock. Yes, I know. I was happy to too.
It was on the map for 10 years ago, but Milwaukee kind of derailed that. No pun intended.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any tables at the coordinating in the transportation planning that's talking about, and we have TriMet folks at the table talking about that extension. Mr. Lewis, do you know that?
So yeah, I'd agree with that, Mayor Smith, that there hasn't been a lot of discussion over the last few years about extension of rail, but there has been a lot of discussion about more high, I'm going to get the term wrong, but just more busing service, larger capacity buses.
Buses.
Rapid.
Yeah. But, and cross access as opposed to just heading to Portland, heading to Clackamas, heading to Tualatin, Wilsonville, more interconnectivity. We are getting a Oregon City shuttle. So there is a lot of focus on transit in Oregon City and Clackamas County. It doesn't seem rail focused. It seems more bus focused, which, for Oregon City, I think, with our challenges around transit center, and just the idea of, it would be a challenge, I think, with rail. So I think buses make sense, at least in the planning horizon.
Yeah, I'll say if you're interested, Clackamas County just produced a transit development plan in March of 2021. I have the executive summary on my desk, but I don't, we reviewed it at Clackamas County, but I don't believe we talked about rail. So I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think it's an active conversation. The active conversation is on the Tualatin side about the Southwest rail. You've probably seen that in the news. Commissioner McGriff.
I wanted to ask Mr. Lewis about page 118, column 2, the last inset says continue to contribute with ODOT as needed to complete the 99E Railroad Avenue safety improvements. So seems to me that some of that could be working with ODOT to complete some safety improvements at 10th and Main. And I know I saw that up there. It says continue ongoing Eversty grant for funding of Main Street 10th to 15th. But obviously that the bridge project is coming down to the end, and there's going to be needed some information about how we might participate in that. I know it's not a done deal yet, obviously, and there's still options on the table, but those safety improvements at I want to refer to as McLaughlin Boulevard and 10th Street would be something to continue to talk to ODOT about. And doesn't that fit into our Riverwalk plan that we have, the path along the river that currently exists?
Yeah, good points. There's a lot of projects kind of focused on our downtown that are maybe outside our budget horizon, but the 99E and Railroad project was intended to help with that transition as you come off of 99 onto Railroad Avenue and give pedestrians who might be using the tunnel a little bit more of a transition, a safer transition. You mentioned Main and 10th, and then 99E and 10th. The Main and 10th project is really kind of the idea of a boulevard project that would at least fix the paving from 10th to 15th, or I can't remember if we said 17th, but then the other project you mentioned is more of the walkability along 99E to extend the pathway that exists right now on 99E from 10th to, say, Johnstorm Park. And a lot of improvements there. That's a longer range project, and I think we have received some grant funding for some study work along there, which will probably identify some pretty significant needs along there.
And I think that timeline's in a couple of years. It's a couple of years out.
Yes.
Yeah, we did the McLaughlin corridor study, so we were able to do from the Clackamas to through to 10th, and then we still have 10th to kind of what we call the tunnel, that section as you come down southbound and make the sharp left in the hairpin in the corner there.
But we're watching that pretty close. We're continuing to seek funding opportunities. This pedestrian bridge was a little different than what we were anticipating, but it's related, as well as the Riverwalk. All those things kind of tie together.
Okay.
You have just the one slide on SDCs that was kind of covering all of the different fund.
It was, yes. So I guess I don't know if you want to go each facility or if there's just
no. I'm just making sure we're all on the same page.
Sure.
That it covers the whole thing. All right. I don't see any more questions.
Okay. Before I go to the next slide, on page 123 of your budget, we didn't make a slide for this one, but fleet services. Purchase the Oregon City Public Works purchases and maintains city's fleets, including dump trucks, street sweepers, etc. It's a maintenance budget for our fleet that we can maintain internally. Okay. Next will be community facilities. So this includes public building projects. The Public Works and Parks Operations Center will be completed in the proposed biennium. There's a small set aside for future police and municipal court facility and future library facility capital needs from savings of those projects. Each project's funding is restricted and segregated. The total budget for each project is shown on this slide. Additionally, the community safety advancement fee are deposited in this fund and transferred to a debt service fund for the payment of principal and interest on those bonds for that facility.
Ms. Lugo.
That's a rather large contingency. What are is that contingency just going to be held in reserve, and what would it be held in reserve for?
All of the transfers and represent future spending for those items. It's not, by virtue of it being a contingency, it's not an operating contingency for unseen. It just means it's not going to be spent this year.
So one of the things that we've historically struggled with is maintenance of our facilities over the long term. So one of the goals that we had when we completed the Robert Libke Community Safety Facility, as well as the library, and we'll continue to do this with the Public Works Operations Center, is that, you know, it's great that we have a brand new building right now, but, you know, we know in 5 years, there's going to be something. In 10 years, there's going to be something. In 15 years. So we're trying to set aside enough reserves so that when we got to replace the roof or the HVAC system or the elevator, that we're not scrambling. So we're really trying to get ahead of it now while we have the opportunity to do so, to set ourselves up so that we can truly get the total life expectancy of these buildings, rather than some of the deferred maintenance issues that we're dealing with now on some of our facilities from just wear and tear over decades of use.
You know, as a Midwesterner, I really appreciate it when anybody says roof. I really do.
Yeah, it shows sometimes. Yes.
I heard it, but I didn't know it was Midwest. All right, any other questions? This section also covers PERS, and are there additional slides?
Yes, there are. Yep, I was going to go to with the equipment replacement is next. So Public Works and participating departments evaluate the city's fleet to recommend newer replacement vehicles based on need, age, maintenance, costs, and safety concerns. Departments make annual transfers to this fund to accumulate savings for current and future purchases. The proposed budget is $9.5 million, includes $3.3 million in purchases and $6.2 million in ending reserves. Once again, very same concept as to what we've seen with buildings across the entire city. As these, you know, some years it's vehicles, other years it's large vector trucks. So really just trying to stay ahead of, you know, not wanting to get behind the curve on when we need to replace these critical vehicles that are necessary for the functions that we perform.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, Mr. Lewis, when we take a vehicle out of rotation, do we sell them and get any revenue from them, or what do we do with them?
Depends, but if the vehicle is a vehicle that's got a lot of maintenance costs associated with it, we would get rid of it, auction it, and recoup those revenues. And sometimes they're reasonable amounts of revenue, and when they do that, goes back into this fleet fund. Other times we use them for seasonal staff. Lots of times for a lot of the pickup trucks that maybe have outlived their life, but they're still not carrying a lot of maintenance costs. So we've done that as well. But generally, the idea is to move them out of the fleet because they are costing us something more than they should in terms of maintenance.
And then I think you and I had a discussion about, electric vehicle charging stations, and, are we looking at all at future purchases that might include, for instance, like a hybrid for the inspectors or folks like that, so we can start saving a little more money? In the long term, obviously.
Long term, yes, especially with the commission goal. So that was good direction.
Okay, so if I need a used vac truck, I should talk to you then, right?
Yes.
All right, Miss Lugo.
Just for my own entertainment, what do you do with those little 3-wheel things? Does anybody buy those?
Jim Ban oversees septic systems, and what else did we decide, Denise? And he also oversees those 3-wheeled rigs, and I don't really know what they do with those, but I would like to know more too, Emma. So maybe Jim can help us out with that.
Thank you, Chief.
Parking.
That's it. So yeah, they're used in parking enforcement. Do they have a resale value? I'm not sure.
We kind of run those into the ground. I don't think we've ever sold one.
Okay.
Do they go for scrap, or what do you do with them?
We've never gotten rid of one.
You still running the same fleet?
Say that again.
Are you still running the same fleet?
On the three-wheelers, yeah. We added one, I think a couple of years ago, but I don't believe we've ever sold one. Generally, when we get rid of stuff, we do like John does, and they go to auction.
Well, I remember when Peter Bush bought the first one, they were so excited about that. They were cruising around the streets with it.
Okay, we're almost there. Next slide. Yep. So here's where we get into some of the other funds, starting on page 127. Staff and utility customer service provide utility billing, collection, and general customer service. Fleet service fund maintains the city fleet. Both funds are funded by charges to user departments. So here you see the total budget for the fleet services as well as the utility customer services and the applicable pages. I think we already went through fleet services. So 127 with utility customer service. One thing we've seen during COVID is just significant increase in credit card usage, which we have a service fee charge on when those are processed. We do expect that to come down. We did raise the credit card limit levels that we would accept because of COVID. We're going to start backing that off, as well as looking at a different system where those service charges are reduced to the city.
Mr. Conkle, can I ask you a question about utility customer service?
Yes.
So we switched over to a system where our bills are going to a PO box, and so how many people utilize? Do you know how many people utilize that versus putting them in the drop box or bringing them in person, or is it pretty equal, or most people just mail them in?
Yeah, Matt, you got a sense for that? I don't.
I don't have a number. I'm going to see if Ryan is here listening, see if he has a number.
I just wondering if that's related to cost of processing versus, because I know a lot of people will bring them in just because they like to visit with, people at City Hall, the utility billing staff. So
yeah,
I can never remember my password on that oregoncity.org/bill pay. It's like it's just I can never figure that thing out, but it's all right.
Give me a call tomorrow. We can take care of that for you. To answer your question, very few people are using the Dropbox anymore. And of course we do see very little traffic on the in foot. To your point about people coming into City Hall, so online usage is on the increase. It'll be interesting to see what happens after COVID sort of is mitigated and life returns to normal, because we do have a regular customer base that comes in and says hi as well as pay their bills. So
I just dropped my water bill in the box this afternoon.
Okay. And last, we have debt service, other funds. So the Public Employees Retirement System, or PERS, unfunded actuarial liability bonds were issued by the city in 2005 in the amount of $17 million to fund its PERS liability. These bonds mature in 2028. The city issued $16 million of voter-approved full faith and credit obligations bonds dated June 5th, 2018 to provide a new police and municipal court facility. Revenues to pay the $2.2 million in principal and interest come from a transfer of the community safety advancement fee utility fees designated for this purpose. I will say that when we did the last budget in our current biennium, the projected increases to the local jurisdictions were significantly higher than what they actually came in, which was a relief. There was a lot in the current budget. We were doing a lot of preparing for what we were anticipating to be significantly higher increases than what we were currently seeing. So that was a benefit to us. Any questions about the debt service?
Ms. Lugo?
How long is the bond on the community safety building, and do you anticipate any construction projects in the next 5 to 10 years that are going to require going to the voters with the request for a bond?
What was the duration on PD? Was it 15 or 20?
It matures in 2038, so 20 years.
About 20 years, yeah.
Do I anticipate? Currently, no. Our charter does require that any debt that the city takes on does need to go to a vote of the people. So whether that be, a significant water project, let's say we want to try to bond that would have to go to the vote of the people. Or let's say we do the city facility plan and we decide that we want to move City Hall up by the Robert Libke facility. Either we're going to save the money to pay for that in cash, or we're going to have to go to a vote to approve any indebtedness.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we are through the budget. Congratulations.
All right. So what is the pleasure of this committee? The staff report that I do not have up had some suggested language for this committee to consider. Get to it very quickly. So it says this item is under public hearing. That's the way it's presented on the agenda. So do we need to open a public hearing in order to? That's the way I interpret that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, it's not this. Yeah, it's not this item. So this item was the review of the proposed budget by section. So then we would go to the next agenda item, which is the shared revenue, the state shared revenue, and that is a public hearing.
Okay, so is the, there's no attachments or anything for me to know what the public hearing is about. Is that a completely different topic, or do you have what you need for the budget discussion?
Right, Matt, do you want to explain state revenue sharing and what this process is? This is really a procedural move, a thing that we need to do. So can you walk through that real quick?
Yeah. And I don't want to get ahead of the public hearing, but if I repeat it again during the public hearing, that'll be fine. The state revenue sharing is a component of the budgetary process each year, where the budget committee has a responsibility to hold a public hearing to receive public comment on the use of revenue that we receive from the state, which is 14% of the liquor tax. And that's distributed based on population. And one of the requirements back when that liquor tax was set up was that the entities that receive that hold both a public hearing before the budget committee for the proposed use or possible uses, and then again before the commission when they go to adopt the budget on the proposed uses. So I can go into further with that unless you want to have me wait until the public hearing. So.
All right, so so maybe I'm just not clear. As the elected chair of the budget committee, we did not go over what the plan was for this meeting. So that's why I'm asking these process questions. Do you need a motion, or do you need anything? Are you desiring anything for item number 1 of the review of the budget? Or do you feel like you have everything you need for that item?
I guess for number 1, I guess when would the commission or this committee like to discuss, is the budget, are there changes going to be made? Is the budget as approved? Do we need to work through any of those issues? I know we had, the website discussion, the charter parks discussion.
Library.
I'm sorry, library, yeah.
I move that we accept the budget as presented.
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion? Is everybody too tired at this point?
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh.
There is a motion and a second. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like we have to hold the public hearing before they can make a motion to recommend the budget to the city commission. Is that correct?
I do not remember the order from last year.
Okay.
So I do know that the public hearing was right at the very end of the meeting.
Yeah. So the motion and the second are actually what's written on the agenda. What staff would be looking for to complete this and move it to the city commission would be, after the public hearing, we would be looking for a motion that approves the 2021-2023 biennial budget in the amount of $235,204,653 to be forwarded to the city commission for adoption. That's the actual motion we would be looking for to move this forward, but we would be looking for that after the public hearing to make sure that there are no folks that would like to speak on the public hearing. I apologize for the procedural issue.
No, thank you.
So I think, Mayor, I guess the question is, do you want to have a discussion under review the budget? Or would we like to move to the public hearing, at which point we'll approve the state revenue sharing, then approve the 2021-2023 budget, and then approve the general operating tax. I think I'd prefer to kind of keep it in that order. So I guess, do we want to be done with review budget now? or do we want to discuss?
I think we might have a couple of things to discuss. Mr. Flesh.
Yeah, just a procedural thing. The discussion should come after the motion has been made and seconded.
Right, and the motion is now in the wrong order, so I think we need to ask Ms. Lugo to withdraw.
I withdraw the motion.
All right, thank you. All right, so it sounds like now we need
to withdraw the second as well, so I'm withdrawing the second.
Okay, so I'm going to open the public hearing for the state revenue sharing agenda item.
Mr. Zook will give a staff report.
Yeah. Mr. Zook.
Thank you. So ORS 221.770 outlines how 14% of the liquor tax is allocated amongst municipalities based on a population formula. And as a recipient of that, part of the requirements are that a public hearing be held before the budget committee for the possible uses of those funds. And then a second requirement is that a public hearing be held before the governing body when they adopt the budget. And so in our budget, we have we anticipate $443,000 in the first year and $468,000 in the second year of this biennium. And those are accounted for, received into the general fund. And they go to offset the services the general fund provides. They have not been earmarked for anything specific other than to support the general fund operations, which includes, parks, police, et cetera. So if at this point, I think that's my staff report. If there's public comment on how the funds should be used, we would take that at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Zook. Ms. Riggs, do we have any public comment for this public hearing?
I do not have anyone registered, so unless there's someone in the Zoom right now that would like to speak, they could let us know. Otherwise, we do not have anybody registered.
All right. So with that, I believe I close the public hearing, close the record, and Ms. Riggs is laughing because you guys are challenging my brain at 9:45 p.m. on the order.
Yes, no, that is appropriate. And then
Yes.
we do take a motion on this item.
Yep.
We need a motion to approve the state revenue sharing.
Yes, please.
I would so move.
Second.
All right, so just to be clear for the record, the motion is to approve the 2021 to 2023 biennial budget in the amount of
Oh, no,
No,
sorry.
revenue sharing.
Sorry, this is just the state revenue sharing. I apologize. This is the public
right.
hearing one. Yeah, so we just have to approve the fact that we are going to receive state funding.
All right, so thank you for clarifying that motion, Ms. Riggs. Is there any discussion? All right, can you call the roll?
Yes, committee member Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Committee member Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Committee member Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Committee member Kyle Arndt.
Aye.
Or Arnhart, excuse me. Committee member Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Committee member Emma Lugo.
Aye.
Committee member Adam Marl.
Aye.
Committee member Casey Flesh.
Aye.
And Chair Rachel L. Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
So Ms. Riggs, will you explain the agenda of what the next items are that are?
Yes, I apologize for that. It is a bit confusing with this, and it isn't something we have gone over before. So the next agenda item is that we are now at the point where we are asking for a motion and a second on moving the biennial budget forward to the City Commission for adoption. So if it would be a motion, a second, and then discussion. If there are going to be changes to the budget, we would prefer the discussion and the changes be done before the motion. That way we could bring this back to a different meeting for the entire committee to take a look at and make sure the changes are the correct changes and are appropriate for what the committee is asking for before moving something forward to the city commission.
Okay, so.
So if somebody makes the motion, it cuts off the discussion. So should there be a call for discussion first?
What I'm asking for right now is not necessarily, I mean, yes, obviously discussion, but we're asking for changes. We've gone through the budget section by section. If there's things that need to be changed, now would be the time.
The motion doesn't cut off discussion. There has to be a motion and a second, then discussion to approve. I'm fine with discussing it beforehand, like Ms. Riggs outlined, but I'm just clarifying that a motion doesn't end discussion.
Only a motion to table, tabling it does, but we're not doing that.
Correct.
So what is the pleasure of the committee? Sounds like it doesn't matter. We can do a motion. If we think there's going to be changes, if you guys have got changes that you want to propose, then we should probably discuss them now, because there's no point in having a motion on adopting something if we know we're going to have changes.
Mayor Smith, we're not adopting anything. We are just, the budget committee will be forwarding it to the city commission.
Thank you.
The motion to approve it in order to forward it to the city commission.
Yeah.
I move that we do what Katie said.
So
I can't quite say it.
So Ms. Lugo, I think move to approve the 2021-2023 biennial budget in the amount of $235,204,653 to be forwarded to the city commission for adoption. I think that would be your motion.
My moment of glory. Yes, that's what I move.
Thank you.
Second.
So that's been moved and seconded.
Yay, we did it.
Any discussion?
I'm sorry to do this.
Oh no.
So I just want to know, so when this comes to the city commission, then I assume we'll have the discussion about how to deal with the issue of the parks and the website if we want to at that point, correct? I assume that we'll do that before we actually officially approve the budget. Okay.
It is discretionary to the committee. If the committee doesn't hear, there are restrictions on what changes the commission can make without having to republish, depending on the amount of the change. So keeping that in mind, it may be easier to do here. It's the pleasure of the committee, but I just wanted to present that if there are changes that the commission wants to make afterwards, they can certainly do so, but that could add to the timeline and it would affect when we present it to the commission, depending again on the amounts of the changes. So if you're anticipating a large change, and it doesn't sound like you are, but I wanted to add that to the discussion to aid in your decision about the timing of your changes.
Based on the discussion at this committee, I didn't hear a whole bunch of interest in the conversation about the website necessarily, which is the larger expenditure, but the parks issue I think is absolutely crucial. And if that $20,000 is within our, I think it's 20,000, correct?
Correct.
And if that's it within our wiggle room to make changes, then I think I'm fine with where we're at.
So Mr. Zook, are you saying that is within
Yes.
the changes the city commission can?
Yes.
Okay.
The city commission can change a lot. The Oregon budget law just simply requires a different process if the changes are larger than a certain amount. $20,000 does not exceed that threshold.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Mr. Flesh.
Do the city commissioners, are they willing to say now that they are going to take up those topics?
Well, the one topic that I left, I would, yes.
What else in the website?
So I think topics, Mr. Flesh, right? We've got Commissioner Smith is talking about the $20,000 for the charter parks. There was $100,000 for the website and
Correct.
parks. Are you referring to like the 300 from the library or just those two?
Just the first two you mentioned.
Okay.
Okay, so that I guess if there's anyone on this committee that has issues with the website, because I didn't hear that there was enough to make that a priority, but unless I'm wrong.
I believe it's a issue. It's a small dollar amount, but the other night when we were talking about it, I went on the website and to be quite honest, I think it looks great and it functions well. I've used it as a citizen and I don't want to bicker about, that amount of money, but it is $100,000 that could be used on something else.
Parks.
Yeah.
Lots of things.
I agree.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think there is a dollar amount to work on a portion of the website as far as an engagement piece. And so that set aside is already in the budget. So yeah, I would agree. I'm not inclined to take up the website refresh item, but definitely the charter park item.
All right, we're there. Let's go.
I've got to say,
That's
I'm
all for
like
the
so
question.
impressed with you city commissioners. It's like you have to deal with this week after week and you don't get paid for this. It's incredible.
Oh, we could add that to the budget right now, maybe. Let's go.
I get paid by the satisfaction of knowing that I've served my community. That's my part.
All right. And on that note, Ms. Riggs, will you call the roll?
Yes, committee member Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Committee member Mike Mitchell.
Reluctantly, aye. I think we met the minimum legal requirement, but I don't think we really did anything to more accurately reflect what might be priorities in our community, but aye.
Committee member Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Committee member Kyle Arnhart.
Aye.
Committee member Frank O'Donnell.
Join Mike Mitchell with a reluctant aye.
Committee member Emma Lugo.
I do wish that this committee had funded more money on homeless services and on low-income housing, but I do vote aye.
Committee member Adam Marl.
Aye.
Committee member Casey Flesh.
Aye.
And Chair Rachel Lau Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
And I agree with all too.
You need the second request?
Yes, please.
I'd like to move we approve the general operating tax rate of $4 and how do I even say that? 4.409 per $1,000 of assessed valuation for the fiscal years ending 2022 and 2023.
Second.
Right. Any discussion, questions? Ms. Riggs?
Committee member Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Committee member Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Committee member Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Committee member Kyle Arnhart.
Aye.
Committee member Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Committee member Emma Lugo.
Aye.
Committee member Adam Marl.
Aye.
Committee member Casey Flesh.
Aye.
And Chair Rachel Lau Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Right. Is there anything else on this agenda other than adjournment? No. All right. Thank you all for participating. Our citizens for serving on this budget committee. It was long hours and we do appreciate your time and input. So we're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.